It's 9:01. I see no reason to wait.
Daily, I work with internal audit here at USBE. That's great.
Ben Rasmussen, the Director of Law and Professional Practices.
Joy Lynn Lincoln, I'm running for District 9, Joe Wright's seat.
Oh, welcome.
Okay. Linda Hanks, I'm a local board member and representing USBA here. Thanks, Linda.
I'm Sarah Young. I'm the coordinator for digital teaching and learning here at the Utah State Board of Education.
I'm Diana Sudworth, Director of Teaching and Learning.
Darren Nielsen, Assistant Superintendent.
Sneaky
Superintendent.
There,
I'll sit over
Hi.
here.
Hi.
Not right behind you. I'll be behind Patty.
There we go.
Oh,
I trust him.
Okay, and then
John Collins, I'm
We're representing District 4.
Patty Norman, Deputy Superintendent, Student Achievement.
Thank you so much. I have to say hats off to you because you all found your way to room 156 this morning.
I was
I'm a little
scared.
Harry Potter going through secret path.
I think one of the major outcomes we were able to achieve within 2 meetings, working with the business administrators and superintendents and transportation directors that were invited to participate. We have some recommendations that the group will be making to this board. We'll put those in a preliminary report for your review before we present those. But largely, we'll be asking for a statute change that changes the way that we calculate and ask for the appropriation for to from. So the calculation will stay relatively the same, but how we ask for money and how we're measuring that status point, we're seeking to bring that into a more reflective environment to match costs in the current year with what we're asking for. Right now, those costs are on a 2-year lag, which is one of the reasons that the business community and our business administrators are seeing such a disparity or a difference between what they're being funded for and what the costs are.
So more to follow on that, but we did want to make sure that we recognize the progress and the achievement there. And as an associated with yesterday's meeting in front of the Public Education Appropriations Committee, there seems to be happiness and support for the fact that we're taking an inclusive approach to anything and everything we're doing, whether it's the systems upgrades or what we're talking about, the bridging and towards the BI. Also at hand is the NES work group. Chair Huntsman, you had ordered that or said let's get this done. That one, I believe some meetings have been scheduled right now. Or have we scheduled them yet? Yeah.
I think they're starting in August.
They're starting in August. We didn't necessarily make anything or one over the other as a priority, but we felt we could knock out the to from fairly easily. So we're tracking on that as well. So there's progress in those areas too. So subject to your question, or Chair, subject to your questions or questions of the committee members, that concludes 1.1.
Okay. Move on, 1.2.
1.2 is the section review. It's the SAS section. I'd ask that you invite up representatives from the SAS section. Who wants to come up? There's 3 chairs. Do you all want to come up, add a chair on the end? Okay, come on up. Come on up. Introduce yourselves to the committee so we can record your names and track you.
And Cami, are you driving the PowerPoint?
I can.
So we don't do that, is that right?
Okay. Yeah, I'll do it. And so, and Brian, just say, well, whoever's briefing, just say next slide, okay?
Okay.
Hang on a sec. Oh, I thought I was going to do it. Oh, here we go. So I'll pull up the PowerPoint presentation. Just before you introduce yourselves and get started, let me orient the committee members to this agenda item. Each month, one section from within our enterprise comes forward to the Finance Committee, provides background information or detailed information by way of a PowerPoint on what the scope of their section's operations are, what programs they run, any compliance type aspects to their operations. In addition to that, we provide the latest and greatest update of their budget. So it's a shot in time for the budget report that you'll see, or the summary that we provide to you about where they're at in the current fiscal year. So with that, go ahead and introduce yourselves, and I'll make sure the presentation's up here.
Okay. I'm Brian Olmsted. I'm the executive coordinator of the Student Advocacy Services section.
Rebecca Donaldson. I'm the coordinator with the federal programs that have related state initiatives as well.
Lillian Sosa Jensen, Counseling, Equity, and Prevention.
So our first slide just takes us to our org chart, which is interesting. These slides are built in a widescreen. Our org chart is built in a legal size portrait, so it takes 2 pages to show us this, but we're a large section. So we kind of have our 3 teams or 3 groups. I'm over the alternative and adult education, which includes the EARS program, adult ed, youth in custody. And I think that's it for my direct responsibilities. You want to talk about?
The federal programs that I oversee are most of the ESEA title programs, with the exception of Title II, which resides in teaching and learning. Title IV-A's was a new funding stream when ESSA was passed, and that also resides in teaching and learning. But we have the other titles, and then we also have some related state initiatives that are intergenerational poverty interventions and high-quality after-school programming partnerships for student success, which directly relate to the federal programs that we oversee.
So I'm the coordinator over the Counseling, Equity, and Prevention section, and as you can see, our staff is growing. This is an area previously that there was just maybe 1 or 2 individuals that would complete all these assignments, but with the support of student services as well as some legislative pieces, we've increased staff to really focus in some areas of prevention, including school safety, restorative practices, even that deal with 504, Title IX, Title VI, and then we also have a school nurse consultant. She is not staff. She's actually staff of the Department of the Department of Health, and she comes here once a week to kind of collaborate and share out coordinating services.
Chair, if I may point out, the school and student safety position that shows Christy Hutchinson, that was filled fairly quickly out of the legislative session, right, Lillian? And with that, that's a result of their efforts in identifying someone that could come in and assume that role and the responsibilities right at that point. Also, because of the changes or the legislative changes that we pursued at your direction, we were able to recruit fairly quickly and get that position on board. This was a position that was presented to the Public Education Appropriations Committee yesterday, so kudos to Lillian, kudos to SAS for getting these individuals on board. Is restorative justice in your?
Yes, that's
which
the restorative
section?
Practices piece there.
Where is that one now?
It's right above school safety, Gale 3.
Okay, so those 2 then were key positions coming out of the session that we used there was 2 appropriations, $543,000 of ongoing for FTEs and $543,000 of one time. So we utilized the appropriation, and we received good kudos from public education folks on responding quickly to the need to the schools for SAS efforts in that, and then the utilization of those funds.
So back to our presentation, we have, our org chart, that's the specialist group, and then we have the office support and financial analysts on the next page.
Oops, sorry. Vanna's not doing very good.
That's okay, that's doing great. Okay, and then our next sections are divided between, so to the next slide, please. Thank you. And we've talked about these a little bit. I don't know if maybe the area of focus we've mentioned. So let's go to the next slide. And this would be, we want to talk about
Okay, our programs, most of our title programs are primarily formula-based funding that goes to LEAs based on their eligibility. Poverty is a huge way in which that is calculated. There are some programs, such as the 21st Century After School programs, which is Title 4B. Those are competitive grants. Each LEA writes a plan and sets goals specific to that LEA's needs. They bring stakeholders in from across their LEA to provide input into how funds are being used and what goals need to be set to improve student learning throughout the district. We encourage districts to braid their funding to support their overall program goals and work toward continuous program improvement. So we really encourage them not to view these as separate siloed programs, but rather, if one of their goals is to increase literacy achievement in the district, then braid other funding sources coming into the district, their K-3 reading initiative money, trust lands money, title monies, and work those monies together to really leverage it, to really maximize the impact that it has on student outcomes. Our state programs, again, we have the Intergenerational Poverty Grants, which relates into the after-school programming, the School Turnaround and Leadership Development Act, which ties directly to our Title I Part A school improvement efforts. Partnerships for Student Success is a collective impact initiative that involves feeder patterns of schools focused around a high school with the schools that feed in, and then they bring in all the external partnerships. United Way, other public agencies that provide services, county governments, local governments, and so it's a collective impact initiative. Teacher recruitment and retention is recent funding that came through our state legislature, primarily targeted towards San Juan School District and Uinta School District to serve very high poverty schools that serve high percentages of American Indian students. And Uinta's had that program in place now for 2 years, and they're seeing wonderful results. Where they had huge turnover at Eagle View Elementary, which is a K-8 school. In the past 2 years, they've retained 100% of their teachers, other than this year they had a teacher that's retiring, and the principal did non-renew one teacher. But it's really making a difference. Yes,
What was
Chair.
the retention rate in previous years?
Previously, they were losing over 50% of their teachers on an annual basis. And so San Juan School District got their funding last year, and their initiative is called the Q-TIPS program. It's Quality Teacher Incentive Program. And what they're doing is looking for teachers that are highly effective looking at their assessment data on student growth and outcomes. And they're offering those teachers opportunities to serve as teacher leaders within their buildings, to mentor teams of other teachers. And they put them up on a much higher level on the salary schedule. We're waiting to see how that one really works out because it just barely started last year. So we don't have data quite yet from that one. Yes?
I was listening
Amber.
to the radio and I heard a great piece on this teacher recruitment down in San Juan. And it not only affects the grades, but it also affects the morale, and it gives great relationships, and it builds a role model for the kids in the school to follow. So these programs are awesome. I've actually been a part of many of these programs. I'm confused about the braided part of it.
Mm-hmm.
So unfortunately, and maybe this is a question that you can answer, when we fund stuff, we kind of fund it in a silo. So if we wanted to have something like a person that worked for one of these programs but couldn't be fully funded, is the LEA given just a pot of money, or would that person have to be paid out of like 3 different pots of money, which would
Yes.
make it almost...
That does happen,
Okay.
and several of our staff members are paid out of multiple pots of these program monies.
And do we have and I guess this is a more LAA specific question, do we have a tool that can help them figure out, because I think this is an impediment for us to hire people that work with just this population, because when we hire an after-school person, we're looking at one grant. But if we could say, we're gonna use before and after-school funding, intergenerational poverty funding, and then another type of funding, we could get a more quality person.
Yes.
Instead of having to have each person paid out of silos, which actually limits how much they can possibly get paid because there's a finite money. Does that make sense?
It does, Chair, if I can respond. The key is really, I think, and Natalie can chime in on this too, is about the compliance towards the program. So they would have to record the hours that they spend on that, and the percentage time is allocated for that. So I wouldn't say that it's prohibitive. There are those requirements compliance-wise that would set the, maybe, for lack of a better term, the guardrails on just, how much time they could spend in each area, because we have to really be good at documenting.
Yes.
That their what we call effort, their time and effort towards that particular program, in order to ensure that we're complying with the intent of the funding for that. So.
And I know that seems like it's not prohibitive, but for this institution, we have a lot of people who are working in that capacity for one school to try to coordinate how all those funds. It can be done, and a really skilled secretary at an administrative assistant at a school could probably do that, but I'm not seeing it happening. So I'm just wondering if there's a way that we can facilitate that so that our schools in need can actually get really quality workers.
Could we do that? Could we make that part of the monitoring or part of it? So.
Well, so
Natalie.
the one thing that I was going to bring up is that with the formation of staffs, we've had a lot of conversations about how to bring grant programs together. So a specific grant program that would hire a teacher could be an allowable activity for intergenerational poverty, Title I, some state programs, and I believe that we've done that with, in the past with San Juan School District specifically with their enhancement for at-risk student funds. We were able to help them, I think, as a group, put together an application that could use different funding sources to fund a program. And I think that is one of the things and one of the main outcomes that we're hopeful to achieve with the grants management system. Right now, because our grants are administered in spreadsheets and emails, it's very difficult for school administrators and business offices to see grants that have like purposes. And I think if they had that information in front of them, they'd be able to make better decisions, and they'd be able to harness more of the state and federal funding in the braided manner. Right now, because it's so decentralized and things happen at a different time, even our own staff sometimes don't realize that their grants have like purposes. And so, I mean, obviously this is a 2 to 3 year transition of getting everything in and trying to figure out how to better harness the tools that we have, but getting everything in one place is the start of that. And I think that as SAS staff have worked together, that's something that we've had more and more discussions about, is how do we help people understand that they can use these two things and have the same purpose. And there are still the compliance aspects. I mean, we'll never get away from that you still have to document the efforts that you're making towards those programs, but when you can marry the purposes together for different grants, it's a lot easier to demonstrate that compliance.
So I've been a part of this for 16 years, and I can tell you that I have seen a difference between just doing something and doing something with a purpose, and now actually having accountability to that. So I think what I've seen as a teacher, we've made some great strides. And I've seen all of these programs, except for the teacher retention in San Juan. I've seen most of these programs in the schools, and like the American Indian education programs, we have people who come into our schools and touch base with some of our American Indian students, and it's really nice to see that they have a connection with someone in their culture, and that we're really honoring the struggles that they feel. So I can't tell you how great I think these things are, and I really appreciate how much they change schools. And that's not just actually giving money to schools, sometimes it really changes the culture, because there is a mission and a directive, and you're actually pointing out a need, and so then everybody else becomes more aware of it, even if they're not directly related or doing that program. So thank you for the good work that's going on here.
Thank you.
Moving on.
So,
You can just skip the next slide and I'll talk about kind of the three areas within this section. Very broad, not large pockets of funding pieces as we look at school counseling. The funding piece that we're primarily focused on here is out of CTE. It's a CTE carve-out, CTE add-on funding stream that's funds that go out to our LEAs based on a funding formula where they get a base amount. It changes each year because it's based on FTE, but relatively somewhere in the neighborhood of about $28,000 to $30,000 per secondary school. Because it's CTE, it's only secondary. And then with a formula to be able to kind of support all of the schools, it maxes out around $42,000 to $45,000 per year. So it averages out around probably about $34, $35 per student per year based on career literacy and career development. So this is where they're doing their plan for college and career ready. The other funding piece on school counseling was an appropriation that came out of the 2015 legislative session that was a college and career ready certificate program for school counselors to help them with the career literacy component. This one's actually coming to the end of its cycle, and you'll see some of those pieces from finance as we look at the spreadsheets on that. Equity, there is no funding that goes out to the LEA. No supports there. Our funding that we have is just administrative pieces and professional development, so we have a small budget for that. In the prevention area, we do have some dollars that we are accountable for that goes out to the LEA, but again, very small amount. In suicide prevention, they've typically been about $500 per school, and not all schools get that funding because of limited funding stream. In this last legislative session, they did increase that to $1,000 per school, and we speculate we could fund almost all secondary schools with this funding, with the new allocation for this year. And then there's a very small amount for elementary schools. It's only about $45,000 per elementary school on the suicide prevention grants. And it is outlined where they do have these caps, so there's not a lot that goes out to each of the schools. And then with the substance abuse, that also changes per year on the allocation. We call this fee on fines. That is funding that comes to us from the states that is based on an allocation of individuals who get DUIs through the state of Utah, and we get a very small portion percentage based on that. So it ranges anywhere from $300,000 to about $450,000 per year. So when we don't know what that will look like each year, we kind of base our budget around grants and appropriations of about $350,000 of grants that will go out to each of the LEAs. So we always will have some carryover for that because we can't overspend and overpromise if we don't know what that money and funding stream will look like based on those DUIs each year. Yeah.
So didn't we used to get money from tobacco, and is that still happening, or?
No, I think what you're probably referring to is back in the late 70s and 80s, we had funding from the federal government that was based on drug and free safe schools. We no longer receive that.
We did have the settlement thing, but that was through another agency.
Yeah, that was through a different agency, and maybe that's
So the
also
tobacco
right.
settlement.
Yeah.
Is that what you're referring to?
I think so. Is
I'm
that
sorry.
earlier than the 70s, or later than the 70s?
Yes, that was maybe 7, 8 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where the state received, but it was administered through.
Through the Department of Health.
Yeah.
And that's dried up, or?
I believe that's.
You know, I honestly don't know because that's out of the Department of Health, so I have not tracked that. My apologies.
Doesn't come to us.
So other pieces, just to finish up within the prevention area, we've had funding for dropout prevention, but it's been one-time funding. That allocation goes out to schools, and so there have been some small projects, and that's been spent out to different LEAs that fit the criteria or have been awarded according to what their numbers look like. I'm just looking at what else is on there. I think that's pretty much it as far as flow-through dollars, and then again, just small budgets for management.
Just a quick question on this. I appreciate this briefing. It seems like within your program features where you have suicide prevention, bullying, these are all like heavy, big ticketed items out there within the section and that. How do you go about, this is an operational question, how do you go about assessing your ROI on the efforts that you're making in these different areas? I know everyone's busy and they're very consumed, and there's a lot of different things you could choose to do in all of these areas. I'm just curious how you go about making those choices and then how you follow up with the return on it. Now,
Right.
That's a big question.
It is a big question, and each of these areas, even though they work individually, they also partner together. And we have a systemic needs assessment that goes out to the LEAs for the secondary schools. We're able to fund that through the CT funding stream for school counseling, and to kind of review what that looks like for needs and student needs, and to have those conversations. And then some of it is just down to what the legislative appropriation actually tells us of what we need to do. So we just have to follow what has come out in legislation for that particular item. I don't know if this, is that?
Close,
So,
but-
for like Title I, one of their things was they had to have like 3 community outreach programs where they had to have parents come in, so that was like a data point, like you had to have a certain number of conversations with a number of people. So that, it's kind of hard because you can't measure something that you're trying to stop because you're not gonna see a change right away. So I think sometimes we just they ask you to just do certain steps so that you're putting into place the things that initiate success. So it's because it's hard. How do you measure a dropout rate decrease in a year when you're just putting something into place? So sometimes it's just a matter of putting steps in the right place. Would that be accurate?
Yes, but you also need to know that a lot of these programs are fairly new in the last few years. And even though that there is something that we've been asked to do in legislation, a lot of it's unfunded. So for an example, for the dropout prevention in legislation, they were asking us to do some compliant issues and to follow data for dropout prevention and graduation. And what we found through the data source in tracking that there were LEAs that met the criteria that they would have to contract with a third-party provider. But there was no funds for that, right? Then, in the next session, they did appropriate $150,000 that was just a one-time funding stream that was separate from that legislative ask. So then what we're trying to do is to kind of have those conversations about how you can tie those things together, but it is an RFP process that funding goes out to one vendor. So then we go through the RFP process and award that to the vendor. We look at the data that fits with the other not the appropriation, but the other legislative ask as far as tracking the dropout prevention. And knowing that 2 years ago when we tracked that and kind of started this in the legislative ask, there were 11 LEAs that fit within this criteria. So then we say, okay, we've got only $150,000. We've got this vendor who has been awarded this RFP. How do we make that spread across 11 LEAs? Well, it doesn't quite do that. So then we have to kind of look at how can we best utilize that funding and support the efforts that are going on.
And the reason I'm asking this question is because life's based on results, and there's a lot of turnover happening with the legislature, and I think this next round, Deputy Superintendent Jones, when we go up on the Hill, and a lot you, they're going to ask that very question that I just asked, and they're going to say, hey, you've got this money, or you've got this funding, and we have these legislative mandates, and that is it working, yes or no, and do we need to change something in those mandates, and if so, we need to get them into our Eliminating Barriers Task Force now, and at the same time as we're trying to get funding, or we have these unfunded things we want to get funding, we have to have that story, that little story hour, well, not an hour, minute, of this is what's happening, here's the outcomes, here's this. And I'm not trying to get the water clear to the end of the road, but do we have some things in process so that as we prepare, we'll be ready? Because I believe this next round will probably be a really challenging round to fund education.
May I? I appreciate that. I think you're spot on, and we do have that information that we can put together for you, and some of it's already established. I think the case in point was one item that I apologize that I forgot under school counseling is that in this last session, we were awarded $2 million for elementary school counseling. And the board last month just passed the board rules so that we can move that forward, because LEAs are saying, hey, we know this is coming, where's this at? And they want to be able to hire FTEs before the start of the school year. So we reviewed the applications just a few days ago, and out of the funding that we had over close to 100 schools asking for this money, and we certainly don't have that kind of funds out of that $2 million. Depending on if they're asking for a half FTE or a full FTE, we're probably only going to fund about 45 positions out of the 100 asks that they are. So we're certainly short when we talk about those funding pieces, or in some cases we have these mandates that are unfunded.
But even on that, would we be better off unless our rule says what?
Joel.
Linda, are you here?
Can you guys hear me? Yeah, I'm here. I'm here.
Linda, welcome.
Sorry.
We have all four of us here now, Spencer, Mark, myself, and Kathleen, and we have Linda Hansen on the phone. Let the minutes reflect that. And you know, feel free, Linda, to pop in. I know it's a little bit hard at times on the phone. Pop in whenever you'd like to. All right, Mark, go ahead.
It sounds like you're talking about elementary counseling. Is that right?
We have SAS here. They're doing their section review, Student Advisory Services. They do funding and oversight for a number of different programs that help students who are struggling in various ways. Is that fair?
Okay.
And I'm paying attention.
And Linda, I had a few questions, and I'm just in a little bit of a follow-up mode on some school counseling.
Okay.
Then on our rule.
Okay.
Okay. So my question still comes back to, with all of those 100 whatever asks, and that would we be better off funding half an FTE and getting more counselors in the school, and then they find their money to do it, than funding a full FTE and having fewer counselors? Do we? Is there something in the rule that's so we're not going to take care of all the asks, but the money would actually go further if we did a half FTE, paid half, or created something where they picked up the other half.
Well, so it's really the way that the language in legislation and how it's written, that the FTE can only be, so let's say you have one FTE, that can only be one school or no more than two, so they could split it. What we found in the application process is those asking for a half FTE is the school or the LEA is already funding that other half, and so they want to have that individual come on full time, and so that's the funds that they're asking for.
Okay. It was just a distractor from your presentation. I apologize.
So this brings up
Kathleen?
a disconnect for me, though. If we are creating legislation that's asking us to do this, shouldn't there be a fiscal note attached to it immediately so that we shouldn't have to go back and fund it, as you said, for the dropout rate?
Yes.
Okay, so it should be more seamless. I mean,
Well, go.
yeah, that just, I don't understand how we have that disconnect. Are we realizing that we didn't put the right fiscal note on it, or?
Deputy Jones.
I'm going to keep talking, kind of my own landscape.
Right, no, well, I wouldn't go as far as to say that we didn't make the connection with the fiscal note, but we did.
Yeah.
And that resulted in the $2.1 million. And I think going to what the chair Huntsman was bringing up is, as part of the application process, there's decisions that are being made, both, inclusive of the local level,
Mm-hmm.
like where your example is that, they're already paying for a half-time position, so these applications come in. And I really think that what Lillian was trying to say is within the $2.1 million, we're trying to maximize the return on investment as much as we can while balancing the equation that's already in the local LEAs. So
Can I clarify my question?
Sure.
Because I was kind of going back to the dropout.
Okay, so
Yeah.
specifically the dropout.
So
okay.
they created legislation that asked us to look at the dropout rate and then to study this, but then they never funded that, so then they had to fund it afterwards. So that's more of the one that I'm confused about. So the elementary counselors kind of went in the right path,
Okay.
but the dropout one. So how would we prevent that situation if that was something that was preventable?
So in that case, the dropout prevention piece actually started, I want to say about 5 years ago. It was actually prior to me coming into this position. And through each session, they did some tweaks on the code and the law. And it was totally unfunded. I don't know that that was something that came to us, or I think that, and Natalie might have some context to that.
So just keep in mind the legislative process. Often bills are written in such a way that they don't require a fiscal note. They say may or should, or don't always say shall. And often, in every case, as a bill comes through, we quantify the costs, or we try to the best of our ability to estimate the costs. I think in the case of dropout recovery, I believe, if I remember the bill correctly, it's been a couple of years, we did estimate a cost, but remember the legislature only funds costs for state level programs. They don't provide specific funding to LEAs if it's not a state required program. So often we will quantify the impact on the LEA level to individual districts and charter schools, but if the state isn't mandating or paying for that, then that isn't funded through the legislation. And so there are some differences in how bills are presented, which either require them to be funded to pass or don't.
So as I'm having this conversation, I'm not trying to lay blame or place blame or point fingers. I'm trying to say, how can I assist and how can we assist in creating a more seamless process where we are getting the money in a more efficient manner, or we're creating language that doesn't create these problems. So I'm just trying to understand the process, and I'm sorry if it seems like I'm saying, like, how can this happen? I don't totally understand the process, but I do have a pretty good working knowledge.
Sure.
Scott?
So am I going to get gabbled, sir? Please don't gavel me. To answer your question, how can we help? We really feel that we've got a very productive process in mind where you as the board come and meet on the Hill. And as we're reviewing bills, if we can take that, and I get it, there's like an hour and a half, meeting or something, and there's so many bill files open and all that too. What we can do together, your staff and board members, is address, as these bills come up, like Natalie has explained, is to get into and identify that, well, in this particular case, it's more along the lines of may, or, and because it's may, we're not necessarily going to get state funds for it. If we take the time during the key window there, that is the legislative session, and look to say, hey, legislator, this is your bill. We do want to make a difference in dropout prevention. However, if it goes unfunded, then how would you see us doing that, and have those types of interactions and dialogues on it? That would help. It's not a silver bullet.
It's 9:40. We really like this. I just want to say briefly that I really want to endorse what Chair Huntsman said. I mean, I like this presentation, but tomorrow, if you ask me what I remembered, I'm only going to remember that in San Juan County, there was like 50% teacher retention, and now there's 100%. So I would recommend kind of that return on investment approach. Here are some 3 or 4 success stories that might improve with greater funding, and even have the courage to point out, here are a couple things that we've been trying and haven't been going so well, frankly. And I think that will give you enormous credibility, up on the legislature, to reallocate resources, consistent with what Chair Huntsman said. Unless we have, substantially more, I think we have about 3 more minutes for this. So I'm going to defer to maybe you folks. What do you think is the best use of those next 3 minutes?
I'd say we need to get to the financial review. Is that part of the 3 minutes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I just ask one more question? I'm sorry.
Brief.
We have 2 minutes. Okay. So with our preschool with our preschool and kindergarten. We actually took some of this money and we kind of condensed it so that it was more of a pot of money that dealt with all these things in eliminating barriers, because some of these run parallel with each other. Is there any way that we can provide a better system with these all these prevention programs, and maybe put them together so that they would be funded at a higher level with less? Does that make sense?
We can certainly look at those options, but I think it goes back to what's in legislation and what we're required to do.
And could we go to eliminating barriers and see if we could pass them with you? Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you.
So, sir, the briefing is available for the other program areas, alternative and adult education. I'll just breeze through the slides real quick without dialogue on those. There's some great program details with EARS. We received some additional funding towards EARS, which is great. Then the student support aspect of this section is phenomenal. Brian, did you want to?
Just on that last slide, maybe, if I could, understanding that with the new structure here in the building, our assistant superintendent over student support, Leah Voorhees, we sit in her area along with special ed and child nutrition programs. And so that's kind of where we sit in the large picture of the building. We just wanted to make sure that that's clear. And we're happy to now talk about finances.
So with that, I'll pull up the summary. It's a PDF document, or you can see essentially this is just an opportunity. Again, this is just a picture in time. It's as of the end of April 30th of the SAS section's budget, where they're at as far as their execution rate, which is found in the lower left-hand corner of the budget percentage spent to that date till April 30th. Sherry Gale, will you raise your hand, Sherry? She's their section accountant. She supports the section in everything and anything to do with the financial or fiscal responsibilities of the section. And then, of course, Deborah Jacobson's to her left. She's our finance director. So, sir, in the interest of time, subject to any questions or concerns on this particular aspect, that would conclude the section review.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I make a comment, Joel?
Go ahead, Linda.
As they're reading, I just want to thank them. You know, I work with this section a lot, and all of the staff members are just fantastic. They do a great job, and I just really appreciate them. I want them to know that.
I think you're more fantastic.
Awesome. Thank you, Linda.
I think you're the most fantastic.
Sending good vibes from far away. Okay, moving to 1.3.
Chair, 1.3 is just an informational item. It's the reconciliation of the basic school program for state fiscal year 18. I'll pull up the attachment. It's a PDF attachment, and then ask that Natalie go ahead and walk you through the reconciliation process and then open up any questions to the committee members.
So also attached in the board docs, and did any of you get a chance to watch the video that we sent? We're trying a new method in school finance where instead of throwing up spreadsheets and trying to scare you all as we whiz through them and make you dizzy, we use a tool that we have in the building called Camtasia, and by we I mean Jamie, who's on vacation this week. Jamie put together a quick, I think it's about a 13-minute video that talks through how we reconcile the basic school program. One of the objectives of doing this is to document our process, to enable our LEAs as well as board members to have an understanding of what we do and how we do it. I won't get into the video or watch it right now. I don't know how much information you wanted about how we reconcile the basic school program. The basic gist with the reconciliation is in October of every year, we estimate along with the CDC committee, the tax commission, and the fiscal analyst's office and the governor's office, how much money we think we're going to need to fund the WPU and student growth. As data comes in throughout the year, remember we get new head counts in October. In May we get, or in November we get final assessed valuations, and in the end of May, I said the wrong thing. In November we get assessed valuations, and in May we get final local tax collections from our school districts. So the month of May is a very busy time in school finance land. We're busy working with each county treasurer and all of the business administrators and school districts to validate what their local collections are. What the Constitution says is if school districts that want to participate in the minimum basic school program, they have to assess the minimum basic levy, and then the state guarantees whatever the differential is between the guarantee rate in statute and what they bring in local collections. So if you go, that's really what this spreadsheet is meant to go through. And again, I won't go through the calculation itself. That's covered in the video. If you have questions about the video, once you watch it, please call Jamie Barrett or myself. We'd be happy to walk you through. This spreadsheet that's put here is our final tax rate proceeds sheet. Keep in mind when you as a taxpayer received your tax notice, you have a bunch of lines with levies on it. But as a taxpayer, you pay your bill in total. So the local counties or cities receive the taxes and they submit those into the school districts. We get a total amount, which is this first column, the total amount that's collected. So this is the basic school levy, voted board, debt, capital, any recovery or judgment levies that are issued. We then come up with the total percentage of how much the basic school was for the total amount that was collected. And that's what this basic yield rate, this column over here is the column number 5. The basic school entitlement, which is column number 6, that's how much the state or how much the basic school program is estimated to cost. So if you, I think that this is the recapture spreadsheet. So if you look at it, we'll go to our friends in Park City who like to get picked on. So if you look in Park City, their basic school program is estimated to cost $19.9 million, almost $20 million. Yet they bring in local collections of $23.3 million. Effectively what that means is that their entire basic school program is paid for with their local revenues. And anything that, and according to the statute, anything that is brought in excess of the basic school rate has to be recaptured by the state. So what this is reflective of is an invoice that we sent Park City School District for almost $3.4 million. They're required to resubmit those funds into the Uniform School Fund before the end of the fiscal year. We don't have any other school districts in recapture.
Will Park City then just lower their property tax rate so they don't do that? Was that just a miscalculation by them, or?
No, so the basic school levy is set statewide,
Oh.
and they don't have, individual school districts, if they want to participate in this program, don't have the ability to modify the basic school levy.
Okay.
And the percentage that we're attributing here to the basic school rate is just reflective of what that state tax rate is, even though Park City may assess other rates just like other districts do. So we do have some other school districts that are coming close to recapture, but not anybody who's currently in recapture. Effectively what this means is that there was a surplus in the basic school program of about $18 million. That means that we collected $18 million more than we estimated. And while $18 million may seem like a whole lot of money, it is barely 1% in the estimation process. So from our respects, that's within the margins of safety. We're happy that collections came in higher rather than lower. Collections coming in higher means we have the ability to make programs whole. We don't have deficits. That also means if our student counts are off, we have the ability to fund them. Any carryover that's attributed to these programs stays in these funds and can be repurposed by the legislature. It can be used to fund expenditures for the next school year pertaining to this, the minimum school program. The board, there's also an agenda item later this morning, where we're going to be asking the board for the authority to transfer some of the carryover funds into programs that we didn't quite get the estimates right. We have plenty of money to cover those programs and make them whole as we close the fiscal year. And so part of the carryover balances that you'll be seeing us use are the ones that were generated through this process. I didn't want to get too much in detail. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
Natalie, I just look at this is consistent with some of my preconceived notions, and so I just want to talk it through real quick and tell me if you see it differently. Like Alpine School District, 0.007, that's where I live and pay taxes, my children go to schools. I look at that compared to Nebo. Nebo is like 0.009. So they're substantially higher than Alpine, and it's consistent with my notion that Nebo is high growth and has smaller property tax base. and thus probably has to have a higher tax rate to even try and keep up with the funding that we have in Alpine.
So this column is reflective of the grand total of all of the other levies that are assessed by the school district. I don't know enough about all the individual school districts' budgets to tell you why one may be higher than the other, or why one taxing entity may charge more than the other. It could be due to growth, it could be due to construction, replacing old buildings, it could be due to capital activities or paying off debt. It could be numerous things. But that column is just reflective of all of the other rates that are charged in addition to the basic levy.
Well, I see like Tooele and Nebo are certainly very high growth, and they have some of the very highest rates on here, while Park City has a rate that's, substantially lower than, any other, and yet they still have to refund a portion. And then one of the most interesting numbers I saw here was Canyons School District, which is to the immediate north of mine. They have a tax rate, about 15% lower than Alpine, a property tax rate. And yet they fund each student about $1,000 more than Alpine School District, simply because, so they can have a lower tax rate and yet they can fund their students substantially more, even though they're adjacent to my school district.
Well, and I can comment that there are some school districts who don't have a debt levy, who don't have debt that they're funding. Some of those factors, I think, depending upon the growth that you indicated, or the kinds of construction or facilities operations that are occurring in the districts, definitely impact the rates that they assess. I think you could also, you could draw a lot of conclusions by looking at total summaries. So a lot of it is dependent upon the unique circumstances of each district.
That's more than fair. I think it's very interesting. Spencer.
So, can you tell me how this is ordered?
It's almost alphabetical, I think, until the end, and it's not.
Yeah, so
is this one sorted alphabetically, kind of, but not really. When we established, this is actually one of the core reasons we have issues in our agency with systems. Each of our school districts has a social security number, if you will, called a phase code. And that phase code was assigned to LEAs based on the order that they were established. So as you go down the list, you'll see Canyons is clear on the bottom. Canyons phase code is number 42 because they were established last. That is the order in which we fund everyone, because the system has to have a unique ID. And so all of our documents are sorted by phase codes. Each of our charter schools has phase codes as well, and when they started assigning them, they started with numbers, with numbers, and then they switched to numbers and letters, and then they switched to letters and numbers. And so depending upon how charts are sorted, sometimes you'll see them alphabetically, sometimes you'll see them by phase code.
So that explains Canyons. How do you explain Ogden?
So my understanding is that that is based on the order in which the district was established, the date that it was adopted or established.
All the city school districts are last.
Yeah. I wasn't here when they assigned phase codes. I just get to live with it. So we have tried to change them, and it topples the entire world. So it is not something that we have the ability to adjust at this point.
That all the city school districts are last.
And then Canyons, the newest, is last.
None of these things are making sense because Park City is not last.
Well,
so it's just maybe when you come back to me with I get that this is just random, I guess, is what you're saying.
I have asked for answers because we have sought to change this numerous times, and until we can change all of our systems and come up with a standardized sorting or number convention, we can't do that right now.
So number one is total taxes collected. Does that have income tax in it, or is that just?
No, this is just the local property tax proceeds received by each school district during this tax year.
So it's a little bit of a misnomer then, total taxes collected, right?
Total taxes collected by the school district.
Okay,
so this taxes go to the state.
Right, so this has nothing to do with, I'm just trying to help the public understand this spreadsheet. So total I guess the heading of the spreadsheet could be changed so that it would reflect that.
It could be. I think that if the public would watch the video that we put on our YouTube channel, this one sheet is the process of about 15 to 20 minutes of explanation. So I think the video would be very helpful if they had questions.
But don't you think that the title heading would help us with that as well?
We could change it to total local property taxes.
Because then those of us who don't want to watch the video could see this is total local. Because I'm just trying to figure out, I was just trying to, by looking at the spreadsheet, understand what that was. So, so this is just total local levy, nothing else.
It also includes fee and lieu, the
Federal government's payment for
the fee and lieu payments that come into local school districts for motor vehicle when you license your car. School districts get a portion of that from personal property. What else does it include?
Does it choose a charter levy?
No. No, this does not include the charter levy. That's a great point. It does not include the charter levy because the charter levy does not go to local school districts. It comes directly to the state. So this column captures all local revenue that school districts receive that is considered a property tax to be considered against the basic levy reconciliation. There's a much larger spreadsheet that has each individual column on it if anybody wishes to see that.
So my final question, help me draw a conclusion between Ogden School District, just a general overall explanation, and Daggett. I think I know, but if you look at that column number 4, so Daggett is at 33.419% and Ogden is at 18.277%.
So that percentage is reflective. So if we look at Daggett, Daggett is assessing 0.004692 in other taxes. So that 33.4% reflects what percentage the basic levy is of the total amount of these two levies. We then use that 33% and apply that against the total tax collect, that column number 1, to figure out what amount of revenue is just associated with the basic. So if you flow down to Ogden, I'm gonna guess that Ogden has a higher, lower, what is Ogden? So Ogden is assessing 88579. So what it's looking to me is that their basic levy is the basic levy revenue accounts for 18% of Ogden's local collections, when Daggett's basic levy collection is attributed, basic levy is attributing about 33.4%.
Then is there a location where this is so I can search so I can reorder the spreadsheet based on a column?
We could post the spreadsheet or send the spreadsheet out. I don't believe it's on our website right now, but we could put it up there.
Because then you could ask yourself some questions and order the columns and see where. So you could have a column that said who has the highest effort for a local levy, who has the least effort. Because I'm assuming that's measured in column 4, right?
I believe that would, if you're looking for what. If you're attributing effort to mean the total tax rate that is not assessed by the state, that's decided by a local school board, I think you'd probably want to look at column 3.
Okay.
Because school districts don't get a say in what the basic levy is.
Right.
That's set at the state level.
So column 3 would be the effort, and I could order that and see it quickly what it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Tooele has a high effort locally. Logan has a high effort locally. Is that correct?
Yes.
I mean, all right. So that'd be super helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're done with 1.3. Let's move on to 1.4.
Sir, 1.4 is the Kairos revolving loan. Need to draw all the committee members' attention to the background of this. There's not necessarily a PDF or supporting documentation. We feel like we've captured the essentials right in the public content of the agenda item itself of 1.4. This is an actionable agenda item. we provide the recommended action to you that we request that you, or by way of the Finance Committee, that the Board of Education approve the write-off of the remaining principal, interest, and late fee balance of the Kairos Academy loan, and authorize your staff to work with State Finance and the Office of State Debt Collection to obtain approval for the write-off of the account receivable balance as of 6/30/2018, which is the date of year-end close of state fiscal year 18. That's what we're seeking, so subject to your questions on the background or information, it's a procedural aspect that gets us through year-end close for that particular debt or loan.
I think this probably makes sense, but is there any other alternative other than trying to squeeze blood from a stone?
So we spent some time within the last couple of months going over the financial statements and the reports that were submitted by Kairos as they closed. We asked some questions about amounts remaining in their bank accounts, where those went, if they were available to repay the loan funds. It doesn't appear, I'll be preparing a report to submit to the board after it's been reviewed by the staff from Kairos, summarizing what we found in our review. It's my estimation based on the data that I've looked at that the funds for the school have been exhausted and that there's nothing left. The requirements to write off a loan are to determine that an entity either has gone bankrupt, they've been legally dissolved. It's our understanding that Kairos dissolved, obviously their charter was terminated or revoked in July of 2017. It's also my understanding that they took some moves to dissolve their 501c3. I haven't been able to validate or verify that yet. So we're still kind of working through some of those closure processes, but I don't believe that it appears they have funds sufficient to pay off the balance of the loan.
Spencer?
So don't misinterpret anything I'm about to say as not me supporting this move, but I just want to understand. So Kairos had there was only one person. I mean, it says he died, right? I mean, it says.
The debtor has died.
Hang on a second. Hang on. Well, no,
That is just a subset of the policy that authorizes the allowable reasons you could write off a loan under state finance policy.
Okay. All right. So I was just reading through this and I see now that that's correct. But so they owe the state $43,381 if we write off the interest and penalties.
So we'd have to write off the entire balance, which is the $45,979.97. Those are the amounts outstanding and currently sitting on the books for the Board of Education because we manage that loan.
Some of those other three numbers. Okay. So just as a curiosity, so who's responsible? I mean, who is I get that they closed out a Zion's bank account, didn't notify us, and opened an America First account, and it seems like that's pretty shady. I'll just say it that way. And but who is responsible for the debt? Who are we trying to collect it from? Are we going to try to collect it? I mean.
So, one thing that I'll bring up is that we've had a lot of conversations as we've been working with the charter board on how to appropriately close charter schools, about how to ensure that some of these obligations are considered or taken into consideration as the school liquidates their assets. Because we don't right now have the ability to control that liquidation process. The board and the Board of Education staff don't have the ability to direct where funds go. That's something that is still a pending issue.
So we're constantly coming up with a list of things that we can ask the state legislature to do. We had one yesterday. We have another one today. These are things that actually will make a difference as opposed to the things I've debated for the last 3 years on the priority list. So we don't have the authority to do anything.
Well, one of the recommendations of House Bill 313 is that we come up with a list of potential legislative requests or actions. And I believe that work group is set to begin, I can't remember what the date is, but it's on my calendar. There are quite a few of us who've been putting together questions, concerns, where fund balances are supposed to go when they're established with restricted funds is another issue that's on the list. That's something that you'll see in the memo and something that we've seen consistently as we've looked at closures of schools. I believe we have enough data from the 3 or 4 closures that we've been through in the last year to make some good solid recommendations that will do a better job of protecting the assets and formalize this process. Unfortunately, right now, these loans aren't secured. So they're not secured against property or assets. Really, the only security is against the minimum school program dollars. And once a school closes, unless the board were to take some kind of action to recover funds, we don't have the ability to make the schools turn everything over until they've liquidated. One school that we're closing or still working through closure processes has indicated they don't have a revolving loan, but has indicated to us, I haven't been able to follow up with them, but as they close out this fiscal year, they closed, their official last day was June 30th of last year. They're still working through their books and closing everything. They've indicated that they do have funds left and we will recover that money. As to who is responsible for this loan, right now the state of Utah funded or created a revolving loan fund, and that fund is kept fed by the principal and interest payments of people making repayments into the fund. When we write off this isn't recovered. And so right now, as the revolving loan fund has been making recommendations, and you'll see that in the agenda item like right after this, in the statute they're authorized to loan up to $2 million a year. We have requested that the revolving loan committee does not exceed $1.5 million to 1.7 because the principal payments of this loan and the one or two other ones that we have written, I think we've written up to, in the past have been large enough that it's impeding the cash flow. Really the only way to recover that money is to get a new appropriation to replenish that balance or raise the interest rates that you're charging the loans that are currently in the system. And for all of the existing loans, we have a fixed interest rate that lasts the life of the loan. We would have the ability, if the board so chose, to raise the interest rate on future loans, but that hasn't been the direction that we've received thus far. Right now, it doesn't appear to be significantly sinking the loan fund, but we need to be mindful of that as we're writing policies for the loan fund and interest that, as these kinds of activities may or may not continue in the future, that we'll have to take that into consideration as a risk.
Scott and then Kathleen.
This might help. We've engaged our AAGs to provide opinions and to develop this further.
Are these the same people that told us that we could not video open meetings? Sorry.
Yeah, I believe
okay.
so.
It's private.
One of the key pieces of this is could we, at a point in time where it's determined that the school is going to close, could we, staff representing the board, place the accounts into receivership, or could we become the, individuals over the accounts? That's being developed as well, so that, in the future we would mitigate against the risk of a closure of an account and then a reopening over, along the America First. Those are all in development right now. So I really feel confident. Maybe we're not moving fast enough or as fast as we should be, but I feel confident that we're getting to the point in close cooperation and partnership with the State Charter School Board and their staff. Director Lambert's here, so she can speak to that. I want to call her out and see if she wants to come up here or whatever. But that's the key too, is that we are developing these types of things. I really feel will eventually address your questions or your concerns.
You didn't know
Director Lambert, would you like to say anything?
I feel like,
all right, we'll let you stay there. Kathleen.
So our revolving loan that helps us open and close charter schools, is this money coming out of that revolving loan, or is it coming out of a separate account?
So the revolving loan doesn't help us to close charter schools. The revolving loan, schools make application to a committee that's established in statute and rule that makes recommendations to the board, which is the agenda item you'll see later. The proceeds of that fund go directly to charter schools to open. I believe that in the past we've also allowed major repairs or renovations. Is that correct?
Now, wouldn't taking this amount of money out of that revolving loan incentivize them not to have any more? Like, why isn't it coming out of their revolving loan instead of coming out of a different pot?
So effectively what this request means is that right now on our books, we have an accounts receivable. And to the state, that means that we expect payments to continue to come in. And as those payments come in, we have cash that we can then loan out to someone else. what this request is that we would just write off those, we would write off that income stream because it's not being paid, that's why there's late fees assessed to it. And effectively what happens is that there's no cash that replaces that. So when we write it off, it just takes the receivable off of the books.
Okay. So
And
we're not really
it goes
paying
away,
anybody.
it goes
Okay.
away.
Got
And
it.
so that was my comment about who pays for it. Well, really, nobody does. If the revolving loan fund had a $2 million balance and we loan out $2 million, when we get enough money, we loan out more. This just means that income is never gonna come back into the loan fund, and we won't be able to loan it out.
So
to
they have
anyone
about
else.
$50,000 less to loan out.
Yes.
Okay, that's my question. Thank you so much. I
Spencer?
understand.
This is just my final comment on this topic.
No, it's not.
In the banking world, we have the FDIC, we have, credit unions are self-insured, so they write it, when there's a write-off, the credit unions have never hit the federal, any federal payout loan program. It would seem to me that there would be something set up that would have, that you could do this, and I understand that they're gonna be just giving out less, it hurts the other charters that are involved, because there's not gonna be that money to loan out, but every board I've ever served on, I've known I've had a fiduciary responsibility, and it seems to me that we would take a much longer view on, and one of the things maybe that should be considered if you're coming up with legislative recommendations is, what is the fiduciary responsibility of a board member? Because I think board members would take a much different look at serving on a charter board or any other board in the state if they knew that they were going to have a fiduciary responsibility. Senator Lee's office gets $3 million appropriated annually to it. Every penny that's spent, any United States senator, any member of Congress, any penny that's spent beyond the $3 million or $1 million in a House case is the sole responsibility of the United States senator. That's why you see every budget come in under budget in the House and the Senate, because the people taking care of making sure that budget's spent, the last thing they want to do is go to their boss and say, we overspent the budget by $1,085, I'll need to get a check from you for that. So the people that are being hurt are the other charter schools that aren't going to be able to tap into that loan fund. So that's my last comment.
Couple things, Spencer. It's a charter school is a nonprofit corporation, and so they're a weird hybrid of public and private law. We just declare them public schools. Utah nonprofit law is very generous towards nonprofit board members, because very many nonprofit board members are people with substantial means, and they are unwilling to serve on a nonprofit board, especially when they're one of 5 votes or one of 7 votes, if they are the honeypot, so if something then goes south because 6 of the 7 board members voted for it, yet they're the ones with the assets, they're gonna run and flee. So in the legislature, it's generally geared around trying to get people with last names like Eccles and other things to serve on boards. So those are all good points, but because charter schools are Utah nonprofit law, that seems unlikely. I mean, we could ask potentially when we give revolving loans to ask individual board members to sign up to be on the hook to some extent. I think that would be very unpopular.
But it does raise the stakes, correct?
It does.
I mean, I've served on many boards, and I know what tends to happen. That a board comes in and they eventually, in the beginning, there's a lot of people that want to institute checks and balances and ask a lot of questions, but you kind of somewhat get beaten down, and pretty soon you come to the board meeting, and it usually takes about 3.5 years. You come to the board meeting, you don't want to ask any more questions, and so what happens is there's not a lot of oversight that occurs. And all I'm saying is, if there was a belief that we absolutely needed to do the right thing for this organization, that there'd be a lot more attention paid. This school may still be in existence if there had been more attention paid.
And I would guess if we had those board members here that say we would still be in existence and paying this loan but for you mean bully shutting us down. So they probably have to speak their let's move on. But here's the last thing. I'm interested in what board members think. Scott and Natalie, do we have more applicants for revolving loans than we have money? And by what magnitude? I mean, are we only like about 100? Jennifer, why don't you please come up and address this?
Wasn't that internet?
So like, if, I don't know, if there's 5 million available, are we getting requests for 9 million or
No.
50 million, or how much over are we seeing?
Right now, we're not seeing that overage. We gave out to everyone that requested
Oh, really?
this year.
Okay.
And we did not even go to the cap of the 2.1. We were around 1.7. So we are, right now, the revolving loan balance is looking pretty good.
So I was thinking if there was overage, we ought to maybe raise the interest rate, but we're apparently not even competing with the, totally with the private sector, because we're not even getting oversubscribed as it is. So I think it's probably fine as is then. Okay, I'm looking for a motion.
I make the motion to, I'm trying to figure out.
It's written down in their recommendation.
Okay.
Action.
Yep. I make a motion that we write off the remaining principal of interest and late fee balance of the Kairos Academy loan and authorize the staff to work with state finance and the Office of State Debt Collection to obtain approval for the writing. So I make that motion. Is that what I need to make?
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thanks, Linda. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Moving on to 1.5.
May I make one request?
Yes, ma'am.
Where we are not having a full board meeting until August, it would be very helpful for our closure practice or closure of the fiscal year if we could place this item on the consent calendar that we're doing in July. Is that okay to everyone? Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
I've already got it written down.
Thanks.
Yes, Spencer.
Which brings up a really interesting point. We are a very diverse board, and to get a unanimous opinion or unanimous vote out of a committee is a high bar, in my opinion. I personally believe that every unanimous vote that comes out of a committee should just go on a committee consent calendar, and if somebody wants to pull it off during a regular scheduled board meeting, they can. Otherwise, it gets voted on, or it just goes on as a consent and voted on. Because
That is a good idea.
I sat in that meeting yesterday, and there were like 45 dead horses that were being beaten, just pummeling them. And I think if you can get a unanimous vote out of a committee, it ought to go on a committee consent calendar, and if somebody wants to look at it and pull it off, have at it, and we'll have a discussion. But it would save us a lot of time and effort. Just a suggestion to the chair.
I talk as fast as I can. They're not even.
There's 45 dead horses in that room upstairs we're going to have to clean out.
It seems like the downside of what Mr. Stokes is proposing is we might be done by like 3:30 or something someday, in a worst case scenario.
Well, then what happens is the stuff that really needs a lot of debate can really get a lot of debate because it gets pulled off the calendar. The stuff that doesn't need a lot of debate, the United States Senate does 98% of their business by unanimous consent. It's the 2% that gets a lot of debate.
I've been criticized sometimes when I give my presentation to Finance Committee for not going in depth enough on time. But sometimes I share the view that you have. Like, if you care, you go read about it, because we talked about it, we got a unanimous vote, we're done. And we're not going to rehash it.
There are 5 of us here that have very differing views on many, many items, and I think every committee is the same way. And if a committee member really wants to make sure something's debated more fully, and don't feel like they're getting away, they just vote no. And then it, boom, goes to the committee agenda as a discussion item rather than on the consent.
Seems pretty fair, too. I mean, we don't want to be unfair, but that seems pretty fair even if you're in the dissenting view. I think Chair Huntsman is very intrigued by your idea.
Well, I'm going to go in history. I'm going to go back and say how many of these kind of get a few numbers of the magnitude of the change. So, thank you. Take it under advisement. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Spencer. You're adding value today. 1.5, please, Deputy Jones.
Chair, 1.5 is a discussion and essentially what amounts to an update on the Utah grant system testing and implementation. We thought it'd be value added if you would invite Wendy and Camille from our CTE section to come up to the table. We loaded the CTE grants into the system recently, so could they come forward and talk to you a little bit about
Please.
their experience thus far with the system? Come on out. Will you state your full names and positions as well, and I'll read you your Miranda rights. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. So also too, for the benefit of the committee and any of those, any of the public watching or participating in the finance committee, Natalie's pulling up the website that orients us to the grants management system. Or I'm sorry, which one is it?
Show them the resources.
The resources, yeah, sorry. The resources for the LEAs related to the grants management system is how I should say it. So.
I'm assuming it's not on, or is it?
It is.
It is on.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so Wendy Morton, I am a coordinator in career and technical education.
My name is Camille Clark, and I'm a compliance specialist for career and technical education.
What I'd like you to do for the benefit of the committee and for those listening is to tell us a little bit about your experience, either the implementation of or training that you participated in and what particular grants are now in the system, and comparatively, and do a comparison of your experience with other systems that your grants may have been as far as what this one may or may not do going forward.
Okay, so we participated in some trainings here at USBE that were overseen by financial operations about how the system was being designed and created. We were able to give some input on how our budgets for our grant recipients worked, and were able to work those out so that they could be customized for our needs, for our federal requirements, for our grants. We also were able to then be, of course, the first to roll out our applications EAS.
Yes.
And
they were very willing and gracious guinea pigs, and we're very grateful to them for all their support.
So we had 4 grant applications, or programs as they call them in the system, and so we run federal Perkins programs through career and technical education, and we have some formula funds that flow through our office for both secondary and post-secondary schools or higher ed schools. And then we also have some regional funds that we award out for regional work that they do in career and technical education. So we had those 4 programs that were opened up, and we had given, this year we had provided the application format to the applicants early so that we knew that they would have them prior to the system opening. The system came open, and we did some trainings with the grant recipients through a virtual training, and then WebEx, yes, that's what we used. And then,
Chair, if I may, what was the response of the recipients? How are they feeling about the system?
so everyone's always a little anxious, right, going into a new system, and so they were a little nervous.
Apprehensive
Yeah,
at first.
yeah.
At first, yes.
Yes. So, but knowing that they had the application ahead of time, so we had given them a PDF application so that they would have plenty of time to be prepared to have all of the application filled out the way that it would look in the system, and then once they were in the system and it was available, they would be able to just work in the system to upload that and fill out the rest of the required pieces. So we went live, was it like 2 weeks? Mid.
It was the Friday before Memorial.
Okay.
That was like a year ago.
Yeah. So it's been about 2 weeks, and we had 63
total. Yes.
Total applications that we were trying to collect. So we did actually have all of them meet the deadline.
Yes.
There were some questions at first, and there were some initial bumps as far as people getting used to the system. And I'll let Camille share that. Camille really helped a lot of them get through the process of submitting their application.
Yes, I actually worked closely with Rebecca Nelson and the rest of the Utah Grants team when it was initially opened for our applicants. So for the first couple of days, as Wendy mentioned, it was a little bumpy, but as it is with any new program or anything that you're implementing for the first time. The biggest issue that I would say that we had is that with our creator and our approver roles, a lot of our recipients hadn't put that much thought into that process itself. So that actually turned out to be the biggest issue, is kind of reversing these roles so that it would make our LEAs eligible or able to submit these applications. However, our grants team was actually worked on that very quickly, and because of our coordinated efforts, I feel like that's why we had the 100% submission rate that we did have during that particular deadline. Otherwise, I feel like the system is fairly intuitive. I've had a lot of great feedback from the LEAs telling me, I thought this was very complicated at first, but now that I've gone through this process, I can't believe how simple it is. Actually, a great deal of them have told me that thus far. So we're very excited for that. It's definitely a change from our past system, which is where we were doing uploads through a SharePoint site.
Kathleen?
So I've applied for some grants, and this does look really user-friendly. I don't understand where you'd find the grant that you're applying for, though. So have they been, so yeah.
So kind of the intent of this agenda item was to just inform the board as to how our transition plan is going. So obviously, as we specifically targeted out our friends in CTE, they are great collaborators. They have lots of really great ideas and harness technology and use the tools within technology very well. And so we felt like they would give us some great, honest feedback. And to be fair, there are a few parts of the system that didn't work the way we wanted them to. There were some adjustments we had to make. We had a great experience with our vendor helping us make those adjustments quickly and make some changes. Instead of putting all 130 or 50 grants into the system and flipping it on at one time, we decided to do a very measured release in a small format so that we could learn from that. I believe we learned a lot of lessons about how notifications from the systems, I mean, just the sheer volume of the notice from the systems that got dumped by email bots and junk boxes at our districts. We'll be able to work with IT and the IT at the school districts to help unblock those sites. It's a Salesforce site, and so it looks like spam. So most of our, if not, I'd say probably 75% of our users didn't get their invitations because of those things. I feel like if we would have tried to do a release with all the grants at one time, this whole building would have exploded. So, just being able to work closely with our program managers, make sure it met their needs, make sure that the LEAs were getting what they needed. We will be making some adjustments before we implement anything new. The one thing, I don't know how long we want to take on this, the one thing I wanted to bring to everyone's attention, we do have a Utah Grants site up on the Financial Ops website. There is a part here, and this is the screen that I brought up. It's the grants management system. As we phase in new grants, and we've provided these dates and advertised this to anyone that will listen to us, that's the wrong one. We have, as we shut down the old system and bring up the new systems and try to transition not only all of our new 19 grants, but all of our carryover grants from 17 and 18, we anticipate we have to set up and start about 300 programs in the next 3 months. We have put a hard and fast deadline on all of our LEAs. Reimbursement requests for this current year have to be here by the 9th of July. We are shutting off all the old systems. We are not processing anything until everything gets cleared out this fiscal year and we turn the new system on. Our LEAs were notified of that 2 months ago. We feel like we've done the best that we can to get that out. But I think that could potentially be an issue that you as board members may hear, is we did have to put a hard deadline in order to make the system shift. That doesn't mean that we're taking people's grant money. It doesn't mean that they can't claim that money once we get the new system up and running. What it does mean is that I can't keep an old system running and make payments out of it and transition things into a new system. We have to draw a line in the sand to switch those over. And so available on our website is is where we're putting our transition plans. We wanted to go through this release with our Perkins staff and make revisions to the system before we start planning out any new programs. Most likely the next programs that will go live in the system will be our federal formula grant program, special education and Title I, potentially. We usually let our LEAs plan for those major funding sources during the summer so that they can start spending those funds in July. This year we'll be harnessing our old UCA system for applications and the new system for budgets and payments. Our LEAs have been trained and we've talked that through. Our transition plan includes a specific training for those specific grantors every time we turn on a new grant. So just like we did with Perkins, we would bring in the Title I directors and walk them through how the system goes. We've had a lot of great help from our grants management vendors and from our internal team, creating PDFs, creating step-by-step instructions. I think set to go live in the next release is a little feature that it's like I don't know what we're calling it, the bubble man or the bubble box or something. There's an orange bubble that when you tell it what you want to do, it will take you there and show you where to click and tell you what to do next. We hope that will be useful for our users. There's a lot of great features in the system. Just keep in mind that there is a lot of development still ongoing. We're receiving applications and we're up to the point where we can do budgets right now. We're working on user acceptance testing for making payments and doing award letters, hopefully by the 1st of July. We are transitioning the entire payment process for the minimum school program by the 1st of July. So there's a significant amount of testing and user interfaces that are occurring in the next few weeks, in addition to our regular closure activities. We plan on using this website to advertise all trainings in addition to sending email notifications out and calling people. We'll do our best to put the transition plan in. There's a list of existing programs that shows where the applications will live, what the program codes are. As we make those applications available, we have the designated person who should receive it from each LEA in our records, and that's who the application will be sent to. So Kathleen, if you're in a district and you're the Title I director, I will automatically send you an email that says, hey, your Title I application is available. My first hurdle is to make sure that your email system doesn't block that, and that's happening right now. And so we're kind of working through some of those technical aspects and trying to help mitigate some of the problems that we ran across in the Perkins process. We were still able to get all the applications in relatively on time. I believe we extended the deadline by 2 days to make sure that we could get all the users in and provide them the access that they needed. But I think all of us sort of feel that it went a little smoother than we thought, and we ran into problems we couldn't even possibly anticipate, and things that we thought were going to be major issues weren't. And so we feel like it was a good learning process, and we have a lot of good information to move forward and work through our further implementation.
Excellent. Deputy Jones?
Just real quickly, I would like to add that we are listening to those affected by such a heavy lift, which are the LEAs and the business administrators. What I would ask, and if Cammy will put this in the record too, is that we're not infallible up here. We know the system will have quirks. We know that the demands that we placed on them, for example, were specifically to Natalie saying that all of their reimbursement requests or forms have to be in by the 9th. We just feel that that's important, that we have to do that to get this moving along. It doesn't mean, though, that we won't listen to the BAs or the users, the end users, the recipients of these grants, and as Natalie has articulated too, that the vendor seems to be very flexible with this and, saying, okay, let's try to change this. So that's the point I'd like to make, is I do anticipate that you as a board member, all individual board members, will hear concerns about the system. We'll hear, well, we don't understand why the board or why the office or staff are doing this. Well, if we know what this is that they're concerned with, we feel that in a productive and professional manner, we can probably alleviate 95% of the concerns, or by way of communication. And that's why it's so important that Natalie brought up the website, to say that, because we're not always there to answer the phone or to get that, or to respond to the text right away about, hey, when's the next training, or when should it be that. We are really trying to do our level best, because we've received feedback, especially from new board members or recently elected board members, that there seems to be some communication gaps sometimes between us and the field, and we're really trying to facilitate that, especially when it could be as stressful as they articulated, that, oh my gosh, a new system, it looks complicated, it does all those types of things too. We really are trying to make sure that we're inclusive and responsive to the best of our abilities, but firm too, with what we need to happen to make this lift go.
Kathleen?
So this looks great. When I look at these existing programs and I see the list, can we make these into hot links so that people can see the background of, I love hot links. Because then people could go to this and they could see the parameters of their loans without having to call you. They could be more independent with understanding what the grant meant, because I'm sure each one of these has a website that's connected with them and kind of explains it.
So in the new system, you will be able, you'll see that same list of grants, and any user can get in. I think it's any user can get in and look at the core, the base information. So the hot link concept, you may not be able to have to apply for it because you may not be eligible or have the access to, but any user will be able to get in and see what the criteria of the grant is.
And then could we have multi-layers where like a teacher would be applying for a grant through some other organization that's paid out by the state, but they could actually see what grants are available?
Right now, our users, we have to pay for licenses.
Yeah.
And so right now, our licenses are centralized around core functions within an LEA. So like a curriculum director, a CTE director, a special education director. And I will say that in contrast to, like, so compare and contrast where we're moving to where we've been. Right now, we have a system that has 14 programs in it. Everyone else is on spreadsheets and emails. So spreadsheets and emails and SharePoint sites go directly to program staff, and often, or in a lot of cases, the business office doesn't even know what program staff are asking for. And so we spent a lot of time going back and forth trying to reconcile program staff and business office needs and appropriate budgets and things like that. This system where we're putting everything together and then requiring the business office to be a sign-off in order to submit a grant is an internal control that we've implemented, but it will most likely require a change in process at the LEAs. And I think that's one of the big feedback points that I've received so far is that, you know, previously the business administrators appear to be really grateful for the opportunity to see these programs in their budgets at the beginning, so that the district knows what it is that's happening, what they're required to track, like those kinds of things, what the requirements are. Oftentimes they don't find out about that until we send them money, and then they call us and go, what is this? And so we're hoping that we can, through this system, provide better information. The system will retain all award letters, all organizational or requirement documents. So our Perkins people have the ability to upload a list of instructions. They have the ability to use the system to send out notifications for changes. All award letters will be in the system, where right now you either have to call us for them or go and try to find it in your email. It's kind of a nightmare on the LEA side. If somebody quits, you have to kind of start over. So we're hoping the system will bring some more stability to the public education system as a whole. Just keep in mind that it's a lot of programs to roll in, and we're doing it in a phased-in approach where not all applications will be in here this year. For some of them, it'll just be the budgets, so we can start processing payments.
Natalie, can I add one thing? The other thing that the system will do that's different is that it will allow the grant recipients to see where in the process the grant is. So if they've submitted reimbursements, they'll be able to see where they are in the process. And in the past, that has not been something that we've been able to provide for them. We've just had to kind of give them a general idea. So that will help.
So like they complete a bunch of steps and a box gets checked and then they're...
Yep, and so we can look and see if there are, as they go through the process, who's partially completed an application, who's submitted an application, and so we know where everything stands.
Thank you.
This is good. You have a high priority talk? No. Thank you very much. The better we can make these grants, the more time that people can spend teaching kids. And the grants actually accomplish their purpose, making our teachers better. Awesome. 1.6, Deputy Jones.
1.6 is an action item for the committee. It's prioritization of your federal mineral lease funds within your budget that I briefed to you yesterday as part of the monthly budget report. It's about $450,000. I'd ask that Deborah Jacobson come up. Oh, Jill's here? Oh, Jill. Yes, Jill. Come up, Jill. Dr. Curry, come up for this, for the legislative track. Jill, actually, Deborah, you should come up too in case they have questions about the discretionary fund briefing on that too. So both of you, if you would, please. Okay. For your, or draw your attention to the backup document, or documentation, I guess I should say, in there. I'll pull it up for the public to view. So the subject is a legislative tracking tool, so we'll turn it over to Dr. Curry to advise you on the tool and what the capabilities are and what the benefits will be if you choose to use your balance towards this great tool.
Okay, so Jill Curry, Fiscal Policy Analyst here at the board. So as you all likely know, during the general session, the state board tracks legislation. There are really two major efforts at tracking bills that occur here at the board. So the first is the spreadsheet that Mark Peterson manually updates and gets placed on the USBE website. The second is a tracking spreadsheet manually updated by financial operations staff. Some of the information being tracked between these two efforts is the same, but some is different. So for example, Mark's spreadsheet tracks things like board position and status of the bill. And the one for financial operations tracks the state board submitted response to the Office of the Legislative Fiscal Analyst in terms of the fiscal impact on us from a bill, or on LEAs from a bill. In my opinion, the current process is leading to two major areas of inefficiency. One is that we are probably inefficiently using staff time, manually updating spreadsheets, and somewhat duplicating those efforts. The second inefficiency, and I think this is probably a bigger concern of mine, is that for board members, so for you all or the superintendency to figure out what the state board fiscal response is on a bill, oftentimes you have to reach out to a person. So you may reach out to Sid, and then Sid in turn would reach out to Scott or Angie or Patty, who might reach out to Natalie, and to me to find out what our response was on a bill. So in other words, that information is not necessarily easily or quickly accessible, which I think is really crucial during our very short legislative session, especially if you're in the middle of a conversation about a bill, or if you're trying to gather information quickly before a committee meeting and you want to know how did the state board respond on a bill. That the process we have in place just takes time because it requires contacting people. So really the goal of the legislative tracking tool is to automate this process where possible and make the information readily accessible. This automation largely can be done by accessing code from the Office of Legislative Research and General Counsel. So basic information about the bills could be pulled into the system, which would allow for timely updates. And I'm sure if you have used the legislative tools to track bills, you know that gets updated automatically as information is fed into the system. LRGC has already agreed to share their code with us. So I think that piece is pretty easy to implement. The tool could make information easily accessible by making it mobile friendly, and also creating a public view for the bills we are tracking, along with a USB only or some type of restricted view so that board members and key staff could access protected information. So that information, like the USB responses on the fiscal impact of legislation. So that's not something that we make publicly available. That information is protected. But I think for you as board members and for the superintendency who are doing work on the Hill during the session, it's important information for you to be able to access on your own. So basically, as Scott already said, we are coming to you today for the prioritization of the federal mineral lease funding for this legislative tracking tool. So federal mineral lease funds for education are for research and development projects. So I think that this tool sort of fits in line with the intent of those funds. And then in the supporting documents that you can see in board docs, you can see the detailed project plan that we received from IT on the project. And with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Mark, it seems like, I'm trying to recall this, I thought maybe Scott would remember this. I saw a presentation or saw something where there's a software that already exists, where it's almost like I think they call them CRM, client retention, something where all of this is tracked, and it has a secured area where staff and key people can communicate, say, yeah, as you're lobbying and you're working and you're trying to get in and better your position, that could all be hidden from, I guess, all of that strategic stuff of communication doesn't need to be public when you're trying to move the needle or sway a legislator to swing your way on towards the board's preference. Can we see that?
Yes. So there are several, Chair.
Versus creative, just saying, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. There are, yes, so you did see that. There are CRM systems available. This is actually one of them, and so I'm not sure if it was or it could potentially be with that. So what we're asking for is for you to prioritize the funding to go towards something like this. Jill, Dr. Curry has pointed out to you that the legislature uses a similar tool, right, to do that. It doesn't necessarily mean we have to take that one or do that, but that we have all that capability. So.
What prompted this was, in the write-up here said we would like to create a system, and I'm going, our IT people are varied, priorities, something already exists. Why would we want to create something where we might be able to purchase something and modify it? So that's what triggered
the word
create.
Chair, will you invite Director Felt up from the IT section just real quick so he can talk to this? He came up and whispered in the ear. He needs to whisper to all of you how all this ties in. There is a project, but we don't want to just say, because we can build.
I never get to see the
but we want to
person
buy
that
before we
build.
So yes, you're right on track, sir. You're right on track. The word itself, we probably could have done a better job on it.
Well, I'm not criticizing the word.
No, I understand. But I understand why you're questioning it. That's it. Go ahead, Jared.
USBE IT Director Jared Felt. So we went through the process of working with Jill to get the requirements of what they needed before we go out. We did give them what it would cost if we did it in-house. We obviously know that there's a lot of options out there, and we've seen several out-of-the-box systems but we needed those requirements first of all. So just to kind of give her a cost of, if we needed to develop it, and if there was some custom things that they needed that out of the box solutions didn't provide. So, but we will go out and do an RFP and look for those solutions. So,
Spencer.
My question is not along the line of doing it. It's more the policy of it. So, the purpose of doing this is so that everybody can see the response, and when I say everybody, the Utah State Board of Education team can see the response that goes to ledge research in a quicker fashion than, let me use Laura Belknap, for example. Laura Belknap sees a bill, she knows that ledge research is going to reach out to someone at USDB, and I don't know how their process works, who they come to appropriately assign the correct staff member, but I'm assuming it comes into a contact here, then a staff member is assigned, then that staff member provides a response back to the Office of Ledge Research and gives them a fiscal note, or the fiscal analyst, whoever's doing it, gives them the fiscal note and the justification, and they attach it in a fiscal note to the bill which comes out. I mean, is that what we're basically saying? So that if a board member calls up Sid and says, hey, I've seen HB 268, what's our response on that?
Yes.
Is that where this is going?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. Because I think there is sometimes confusion or misinformation out there, because oftentimes the fiscal note that ends up getting attached to the bill does not match what we submitted.
Well, the fiscal note, I'm gonna take the liberty to not turn to you, Joel, every time I'm gonna ask a question here, but because I think this is a serious discussion. So the fiscal note that you submit, and I'll give the example of UTA. Okay, they wanted to change the name of UTA. And so they sent a request to UTA and asked, what's it going to cost us to change the name of UTA? And UTA stupidly sent back a number and said $50 million, which everyone knows is not true, but that got reported in a newspaper, then it became a major news story, but they accepted. So are you telling me that the fiscal analyst's office does not use the fiscal note that is being sent from here, experts, to the fiscal analyst's office?
It really depends. So that the information that we provide as an agency in terms of the fiscal impact of the bill is just one piece of information that gets considered. So I came from the fiscal analyst's office. So I can tell you that our goal in that office was to verify pieces of information and kind of suss out what the true costs of the bill are. So whether that is accurate or not, I don't know. But
so the next, I guess, question is, that's an interesting topic, which I'm going to leave on the shelf for the time being. The next question is, who's authorized from this office to see what's in that system? Because I'm here to tell you that the worst thing we could do is give every member of the Utah State Board of Education authorization to look at that.
yeah, so that we haven't got to, obviously we haven't moved forward in development, so we haven't decided who it would be restricted to.
That's like
but,
giving me a flamethrower.
I
shouldn't have it. I should not have a flamethrower.
I would think that access would be pretty narrow.
Well, I'm just saying, I think we better make that in my opinion, I think we need to make that determination before we make the determination on we're going to spend the money on this. Because I know that the full board's going to want to have access to it. And I can say this because I'm going off in 6 months. I don't think the full board should have access to it. Because what will end up happening is every member, this is a common thing in the LDS culture, every member a mission president in the state of Utah. So we see a missionary that's doing something wrong and we start judging them. You give 15 members of this board the access to that, and they will all be leadership right up on the Hill. They will be up on the Hill talking to legislators, saying, well, that's not true. I can show you in this document where we're trying to have a unified voice on the Hill through our superintendency and our board leadership. So I don't want to approve this being built if that's going to be the case.
I think, sorry.
But Natalie and then Jared.
So I think that, I missed the first part, sorry. I think that the important thing to remember is that we haven't decided on anything. Right now, staff track this information in spreadsheets, and we spend a significant amount of time making sure that we are all on the same page. So if that's the only thing that we achieve by building a system, that would enable us to go home earlier during the session, to be able to more effectively communicate with each other, and to more effectively communicate with board leadership and the superintendency. And if there are directions to restrict access, those are absolutely things that, we're not going to decide on those things. We know who has access now, and that's probably who would start out in our draft of specifications. But right now, it's a terribly inefficient process that isn't harnessing the technology we have access to.
There's a reason we don't want North Korea to have the bomb, right? So
yeah, that's fine. For your flamethrower.
Yeah, you don't want to start building the bomb if you don't want them to have access to it.
Right.
And my point is, I think this should be an internal decision that should be made. I agree 100% that it will streamline how you deal with internal staff and with the fiscal analyst's office, and I applaud that. All I'm saying is, I'm warning you. You build the bomb, this board will figure out how to weaponize it. And that is not going to be something you're going to be happy with. Chair Huntsman.
Mark, and I appreciate your your concerns here on building the bomb, but I think we can stay away from that bomb based on, I mean, I've been enlightened, thank you, on some of the risk of the data, but for efficiency purposes, it's not about everybody getting to go home earlier or whatever. We have multiple systems here to track and move things, and it's, from my perspective, it is a pain when I have the opportunity to get up there to say, or to be able to assess quickly. I have to chase Dr. Dixon and Scott and all these different players down to say, okay, I've got 8 hours, what's my highest priority, and who am I going to chase down first? And it's so, it is such a, it would be a blessing in all of our lives on the Hill to be able to assess who's seen who and who hasn't seen somebody when we assume that somebody's going to cover it. And it's almost like business development and marketing, the way I call it, the CRM systems, of not having things fall through the crack or have different assumptions happen. Or sometimes you're on the Hill and you see the opportunity and go really quick and say, oh yes, Sid just talked to him, or Scott, or somebody. I'm not going to chase that down or compliment. I'd like to have that tool if it's not super expensive.
But that's not what I'm talking about.
I understand that. That's what
You're
this
talking
is what
about
I'm talking about. Is
who you've talked to, and I don't know if that's planned to be in here.
But that's, well, I hope it is, because it's really, I think it's one of the most critical things besides tracking movement. The public can track movement of things if you want, but also there's our side of it that has responses, and I want to be able to link talking points and some other things to it so we can act.
But you're going down a whole different rabbit hole, if I may, Chairman Wright. You're going down a whole different rabbit hole, which is even a rabbit hole that I don't know that you want to go down, which is, I just spoke with Stuart Adams, and I told him this. If you're tracking of who we're talking to and trying to help drive the agenda, because all of that information is going to become accessible through government, through grandma. So, another warning.
Okay.
The warning is, I just saw legislator X. They have got their heads where it shouldn't be, and it is, I mean, whatever gets written in there, I'm not saying, I know I would never write anything in there. I don't want to have access to it as a board member. But we get a controversial piece of legislation where we're unleashing all the members of the board, and hopefully everybody's on the same page, and they're starting to put notes in a CRM, and those notes then become grandma'd, and I'm just giving a warning. I think for the staff, this is amazing and should be done, and quite honestly, I think every agency should have this, because it would make it so much easier, because the fiscal analyst's office contacts USDP, however the acronym is, and you've got 50 people that need to respond to something. I'm just warning that, I'm just saying, if you start, I mean, there are 15 of us up there, and if you gave 15 of us that access to that information, we're all citizens, and we all are going to use it differently. I mean, I wouldn't want access to it because I'm a lobbyist, and so I wouldn't even want to be in the system. I'd want to see it when it came out to the fiscal analyst's office as a fiscal note. So I just think there's, and I get it, you're going to be cautious, and I'm just sending the warning. So
appreciate it.
Okay. My quick question is for Deputy Jones on this. I mean, we have these federal mineral lease funds. This appears to be a use for them. And were other options considered for the use of these funds? Or Mark, I don't know if you know that either.
So going along the lines of the acceptable use of federal mineral lease for research and development, there are other research and development options out there. We just felt that this was the priority option based on Dr. Curry's testimony here to you today. So there's always other things we can use the funding for. We're just trying to do our level best to look at what is the best solutions that we can put in front of you that we would appreciate your support on and using the funding for, which we feel this tool is, it's a collaborative tool. Given Board Member Stokes's, cautions and all that too, if anything at all, it would just help the staff, the internal staff on that. That's all we're looking for. I'm not really so sure either that it would cost. So Deborah, the balance right now is like 450,000, isn't it? What is it now?
It's 487.
Okay, 487. So I'm not. What's that? I'm not saying that we would use all $487,000. We were just tasked with coming to you with ideas on how to use funding that was remaining. We did that. We've pretty much taken out all your carried forward, your state fund carried forward for the construction priorities and projects. We're just seeing that this is an opportunity for staff and an acceptable use of the FML dollars towards this. I'm not saying we're going to use all 457,000 of it. We're just asking for your permission for an action for that too. So, for the board to allow us to invest in this system using that fund source.
Okay. Do we need to make a motion?
You do, sir, because it's your funding, and we want to make sure that the board is all on that. And you can even actually, as part of the motion, say, with the caveat or the condition that you restrict access or take into account Board Member Stokes' testimony and concerns here today as well.
I'm ready for a motion.
I'd move that we prioritize funding for the FML, from the FML funds for a legislative tracking tool. And I'm not going to add the caveat. I'm going to leave that in the leadership's hands, knowing that concern was raised.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. It's unanimous. Thank you. 1.7, Deputy Jones.
So at the time that we loaded this particular agenda item in, we weren't sure that there was going to be action, so we did label it discussion and action. At this point, there is action required. 1.7 is to report to you, and now we've determined that action is necessary for minimum school program balances. The agenda item has the backup documentation, so if you need a little bit of time, committee members, to orient yourself to the document that was prepared by and placed in there for Natalie to go over this with you. The actions, the recommendations are at the bottom of it, that we are specifically requesting that the board authorize the transfer of $485,340.27 from PPF to PPG to cover the special education preschool deficit. This is all part of, or in relation to, the Budgetary Procedures Act, the Money Management Act. You as the board have the authority to move that money. We're also requesting that the board authorize the transfer of $78,825,268.56 from PPA and PBK kindergarten in grades 1 through 2 to PRA and PRB voted and board leeway to cover the program deficits. Please don't be alarmed with the word of deficit or anything like that. This is all part of the reconciliation, the balancing of the MSP fund. Natalie, do you have anything to add to that? The chair's permission.
So there's two tables on the sheet. The top table shows the programs for which we don't have enough funding in current appropriations. Part of that was created because during the session, LFA staff shuffles balances around to give the board the ability to make these kinds of actions. Some of our balances, if they remain below the line in the restricted programs, the board can't solve problems. And so there is some concentrated effort to move a few things, and we anticipated this happening. So it's not anything that we're terribly alarmed about. What we're asking right now, and just for your information, the second tab, or the second table that's on the spreadsheet, this just reflects our recommended places we think money could be taken to and moved to the top table so that those programs aren't in a deficit. There are other carryover balances. So this isn't all of them, this $14.9 million is not all of the balances, it's just the 2 recommended places that we suggest the money be moved from. So just to make you aware, right now in the special education add-on, which is appropriation unit PPF, there's $715,000 more than we need to fund the program. But up above in PPG, special education preschool, we're short $485,000. So effectively, we're just asking to switch between special ed add-on and preschool so that we can cover those deficit balances. Same thing with the voted in board. Sometimes when we estimate those, we don't fully know what assessed valuations and local collections are going to be. So right now, there's sufficient funds sitting in the WPU lines in kindergarten and grades 1 through 12 to fund the voted in board. And so we need $7,825,268.56 to cover that.
Discussion, Spencer?
I'd move that we authorize, or that the board authorize the transfer of $485,340.27 from PPG to PPF to PPG to cover the special education preschool deficit. And also, the board authorized the transfer of $7,825,268.56 from PPA to PPB, kindergarten and grades 1 through 2, to PRA and PRB voted and board leeway to cover the program deficits.
Any further discussion? Mark?
I'm wondering if we should amend that to address previous concerns from board members on the acronyms that we.
Yeah, I agree, 100%. I just decided not to say it.
Because you couldn't?
Yeah.
So those aren't acronyms, those are their names.
They're just the names.
Line item names?
Yes.
That's a line item name?
Yes,
So
sir.
the PPA is an appropriation unit code.
Yeah, it's not a, you know, what am I trying to say here?
It's not an acronym, it's not short for anything.
It's not short for anything,
Right.
it's just a code.
That's why I used it that way. I figured
You had
figured
that.
much. Yeah.
Okay, that's my only discussion.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It's unanimous, thank you very much.
Do you have a comment?
Just real quick before we leave this agenda, thank you for the motion and the action. We would like to place this in the consent calendar for the next month.
Needs to be.
Talk about that, okay. Just want to make sure about.
1.8, please, Deputy Jones.
Yes, so 1.8 is the agreed upon procedures report, and
So we're requesting that we move this to the August Finance Committee. We didn't have time to get it completed and notify the LEAs prior to bringing it before the board, and we would prefer to have the LEAs have time to review before we bring it before the board.
Okay. Moving on to 1.9.
Sir, 1.9.
Hold on a second.
Go ahead.
I have a conflict of interest, and I'm going to recuse myself and remove myself from the room. I represent one or more of the charter schools that have applied for this loan, even though I haven't done any work on it. Let me know when it's done.
Are you leaving the room? How come Kathleen gets the gavel? How come I don't get the gavel?
Because we don't trust you with a flamethrower, so we're not gonna trust you with a gavel.
I've been on the board longer.
She usually gets it a different way. And now she
Wrestling
gets
it
to
out of his
hold
hand.
She's usually on the receiving end.
Chair Reedy.
Um,
Chair Reedy, if I may.
Yes.
So 1.9 is an action item. These are the charter school revolving loans that came before the charter school revolving loan committee. Jacob Wright is in the audience. He represents Young People. He is also a panel member, a voting member of the revolving loan committee. So if committee members have any questions about the process or the procedures, or any of the ins and outs of what they discussed and all that, he's available. I'm not recommending he come forward or anything, but if there are questions, he might be able to answer more into the process. There's quite a bit of them. What we try to do within the public content is list the charter name with the amount. What we do need the finance committee to do is do it by name, by charter school name, by amount as part of your motion to approve that, not holistically, if that makes sense.
Are you gonna do that?
I'm going to.
Okay. I'd like to ask a question before you start to make that motion.
You want to ask the questions after the motion's made? when there's discussion?
No, it's just kind of a piece of information that I'd like to know. As I was looking at all of these, I've noticed that all of them, to my assumption is all of them follow the same patterns, 2%, and, okay, that's just.
Equal,
Okay.
you mean equal application of the interest rate?
Yes.
Yes, there's no differences, they're all charged the same interest rate.
Okay, because I was looking at them and I saw that they all look the
Yes,
same,
ma'am.
but I wanted to make sure.
Sure, yes, yes.
Thank you,
You're
Spencer,
correct.
please continue.
I would move that we approve the loan amounts, the following loan amounts for the charter school revolving loan account. Ascent Academies of Utah, $300,000. Highmark Charter School, 200. Does there need to be a vote on each of them, or can I just make the motion? Okay.
Just if you detail all.
All right,
numbers.
Highmark Charter School, $297,563. Lakeview Academy, $300,000. Leap Academy, $299,715. Maria Montessori Academy, $265,347. And Scholar Academy, $255,000, with the total being $1,717,625.
All in favor?
Aye.
Voted is unanimous.
Just as a point of procedure too, also, we'd like to place these in the July consent calendar, the chair is aware of that too, so we'll just make sure on the
Hey,
record.
Joel!
Consent calendar.
Moving on to item number 1.10.
Actually, 1.10, we would request that the Chair Wright return. There was a piece of information that we needed to share with him related to his request for information on training for grooming. So we have a response to that. He did discuss it yesterday as part of the financial brief, but we want to make sure he's here for that, so we can do the follow-up on that particular.
We figured out which charter schools you were associated with and didn't fund.
We also realize we're much more efficient when you're not.
That
Just
is
kidding.
also fair and true. 1.10, my favorite.
1.10 is a perpetual item for the committee. It's a discussion item, a request for data and information. Chair, as follow-up to your request in a previous committee meeting regarding training or information on training as far as the grooming piece of that, that will be incorporated into the ethics training that takes place for the teachers. So we're developing that more, but I did say I would follow up with you on that. If you have questions, because you did brief that to the entire board, but we wanted to give a little more specificity to you that we are following up on that, and that we're looking at that be part of the ethics training that is mandatory. From my understanding, it's mandatory for educators to take as part of, or ongoing with that. So.
I think that's very good and very important, because I think there's a wide disparity amongst a number of people on what is grooming and what needs to be reported, and it needs to be made uniform and made aware. It's really unfortunate when collateral damage, other teachers' careers are destroyed when they really didn't even know what they should be doing. Mark?
A quick question. I was looking forward to, well, I appreciated your question earlier, Chair Wright, but where is it existing now in any training at all?
Yeah. So,
I'm curious of that, not where we're going to put more of it or less of it or whatever. Does it exist now?
Ooh, very good question. Deputy.
So initial, and we're still developing this with some feedback from the field that it really is suitable to be part of the ethics training. It varies. We haven't gone to all 41 districts. We haven't gone to all 135 charter schools. There are some levels of that particular topic being covered, but how in-depth it is varies across all of the entities. I can't honestly say that a teacher or an educator or an administrator as well receives the same level of attention to detail on that particular topic across the state.
I do.
as a teacher on this committee, I have taken the ethics training, and I can say that it's not really that, there's nothing, if you get it wrong, there's no video you're required to watch. You just go back and take it again. There was a question that I felt was wrong when I answered it right. So I called a lawyer friend of mine and we argued about it for a while. I would suggest that the link to the ethics training we have right now is sent to all our board members and they look at it. And I think that if we are going to have a standard for every teacher in our licensing, then we should have that same ethics training that incorporates that grooming piece. I do think it's really unfortunate that we have, looking at our UPAC consent agenda, we have lots of people that are pending licenses, and they are being vetted through the pending license process by being part of a teacher preparation program. But when we have teachers that are not part of a teacher preparation program, they are not being vetted, and they don't have any of this process where they are being asked to have their license be flagged. So as we look to create penalizations for our teachers who are not following procedures, we also need to make sure that we are putting things in place to make sure, and I kind of said this yesterday, we need to put things in place prior to them getting their licenses, vetting them through a process, and making sure they understand where they belong on the spectrum and what's appropriate and what is not. I do also think that some of the things that we have talked about are very conditional, and we need to be more robust in our discussions of where the line actually sits, because there are many different. I mean, I actually stated that one of the things that we talked about was buying somebody something, and as a teacher, I've bought lots of things for my kids. I've bought diapers, I've bought formula, I've helped many families, and so, I mean, buying diapers isn't grooming. That would be weird, but there are times I've bought jackets, I've bought sneakers, I've bought ball bearings for skateboards. We love these kids. And so when we look at grooming, we have to remember that we love these kids. We spend 2 years, 6 years, we love these kids. And so I just want to be really clear that grooming should be very, very specifically defined.
We once had a teacher who bought birth control for a student up in Logan, and we took away their license for 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
So don't go there. I think we, Spencer, and then Nate, Mark.
Yeah, follow up.
So I agree 100% with everything that's been said. I will tell you that however you feel about the Boy Scouts of America or Scouts of America or whatever their new name is, they have a very robust grooming video that is, or online resource that is mandatory for anyone who's going to be involved to take. And it ought to be and they've spent a lot of time, money, and effort because of problems. It ought to be the beginning point of where we ought to look for some standards like that. But I will also tell you that I believe that one of the most important things I've done in the last 3.5 years is be a participant on the board during the licensure issues. And I think that this issue is as troubling and as big as 2 African American people sitting in Starbucks that got kicked out, and Starbucks closed all their stores and put all of their people through mandatory training. I believe in high school that every high school student ought to go to an assembly, because a lot of this could be stopped if the teachers knew that the student they were grooming or talking to knew that that behavior was unacceptable. And if we have to draw the line that a teacher, it is inappropriate for a teacher to be texting you, then we need to draw that line. But I don't think I can sit, some of this stuff is just so obvious that we're not protecting our kids from, that we, I think, have some responsibility to stand up. And if it's gun safety, if it's grooming, if it's we should have a mandatory program that every high school student is required to watch at an assembly. It would send a loud and clear message to a lot of teachers, and we might actually find out a whole bunch right after that assembly.
Still digesting that. Mark?
And the reason I was asking what we presently do, it comes up quite often, and I don't think the board has that knowledge. And then it's been talked about where we're going to do it in this other way. But my concern is if we're just targeting the teachers, there's this education community that goes clear to coaches and everything else. And we spend all this time on this umbrella of, I call it the umbrella of safety when we had UHSAA involved and everything else, that we're accountable for that. We create that umbrella. And somehow we need to move this kind of to the front burner. And in leadership, I'm going to see what we can do on this. But we need to define what it is, how we roll it out, how fast we want to roll something out, and get it out, whether we accelerate a rule or whatever it is. But we're just going to keep talking about it, just like we've been talking about the revolving loan thing when I was on the finance committee, and I said, what the heck are we doing? We're in the banking business, and we don't have any off-ramps when somebody closes a school. What are we doing? And we're still playing that game a little bit. I think we need to move this up on the front burner and address the whole education community and not just single out have it singled out into licensure.
Kathleen and then Scott.
My frustration is that we have a uniform policy of what we are supposed to do, and that's standardized across the whole state. And we say, well, let's, we talk about local control, and maybe we shouldn't be, asking every LEA to participate in this. But I think that it should be mandated, and I think that if you can't pass the multiple choice question that you have been given for your license, then you should have to go to a class, and depending on how your score. And I'm a teacher, and I'm willing to put in that work, and I'm saying this honestly as a teacher, I would rather know ahead of time than be held liable for something I didn't know. I think that we have people coming from different states, I really believe that you all as a board should take the child abuse test that I took. I think all of you as a board should take the ethics test I took. I think all of you as a board should come back and say, this does not meet the needs that we think, and then we should have that ethics test revamped. And I do agree. I think our students should know where to cross, where the line is, and if they're crossing it as well. Because if you don't know what inappropriate behavior is, and no one told you, and someone tells you it is appropriate behavior, how are you to know the difference? So I think education for child abuse, and this is part of child abuse, is educating our students about what's safe behavior and what is not safe behavior. If we're not going to educate our students, then they are just as they're vulnerable, and we shouldn't create a vulnerable population. We should create an empowered population.
Deputy Johnson Spencer.
So I listened to Chair Huntsman, I listened to you, Vice Chair Reedy, and not to throw my colleague Angie Stallings under the bus or give her even more to do. My request, though, is in appealing to Chair Huntsman as part of the leadership team and to Chair Wright, is that this is probably a process or development that's probably better served in your licensing committee. I know, I heard what you said, Chair Huntsman, I heard you say, we don't want to make it just all about licensing, it's bigger than that. And so I'm not trying to couch it into licensing, I'm not doing that. I just feel that you're subject matter experts, to do all that. So I'm not trying to, well, I guess I am. I'm trying to get out of this, but not, because I do know how important it is. I just really feel that your resources and your ability to get to what right looks like with this is probably better served by those experts, we're your finance committee experts on that too. So I just appeal along those lines.
Can I make a request that we send out those two?
I don't know if we need an action item. Okay. I'm just asking to, just your staff.
I think you're going to see it on our next.
Yeah, for the leadership.
You'll see it on our next board meeting.
Yep, we're all going to take that ethics and the. Have you all seen it? I sent it out as a child abuse one. Did you all take it?
I see your email and I don't read it.
That's funny because I do the same thing with you.
I don't send any emails.
No, I think we'll have.
That was going to be my next statement.
We'll have a follow-up.
That's fast.
That gavel.
Spencer, do you have something useful to say?
No. We live in a day and age where this two-way communication, you get communication whether or not you want the communication or not. And we need to train our teachers if they get a text message that is inappropriate, because I can see it happening. There needs to be an immediate response that is stated,
Canned.
that everyone knows what it is, that is canned, and it ought to include whatever administrator in the school that is in charge of this. And that ought to be just added onto the text. It ought to be sent back immediately. But I'm actually, I don't want to say appalled, that might be too overdramatic, but I am actually astounded, that may be even more dramatic. I cannot believe that we don't have this training in place. And pardon me, but it's statewide. This is not a local school district issue, because local school districts have varying degrees or decisions based on this. I can tell you a story offline about that. But the second thing is, we have asked, and we asked for it with the Utah High School Student Activities Association, they can't track volunteers. These volunteers that are in our schools as coaches ought to be undergoing this training, and there ought to be a database set up for it. If they can figure out where an athlete is, where they're sleeping at night, which is creepy, but that's where they're sleeping at night, they ought to be able to tell us every volunteer that comes in contact. And this has just recently been brought to my mind because I have a family member who's just retired from teaching, and her husband, as great as he is, has come into that classroom and volunteered in that classroom. And I'm certainly casting no disparaging comments. But what do we know? I mean, if I were a pedophile and my wife were a teacher, of course I'd want to go in and help in the classroom. What do we know about that volunteer that's coming into the classroom? And are they required to watch some kind of training and sign off on it? And this happens a lot, and we owe it to our students to have a safe learning environment. And so I can't
I think
can't
most
speak enough
districts
on
are
this.
going to background checks with volunteers now, and they are required to register before they're, I mean, but that's not across the state, because
That's
some.
what I'm saying.
Yeah, some states, some LEAs don't have the resources.
This is a statewide issue.
I agree.
I appreciate that there's lots of things that are local. This is a statewide issue. Coaches that are volunteers ought to absolutely be trained in this as well.
Okay. Two more things I would like to share. Next month, Leon Wilcox, representing Utah School Board Association, is going to come and talk to us about three things they've talked about at USBE. Internal audit and compliance, reimbursement request documentation, grants management, and UPEFS. Acronym I don't know what means. And that will be on our
It's just
agenda.
a budget line item. It's 2 months.
Okay, 2 months. That will be in August then. So we won't be having a finance committee meeting in July, is that correct?
Right. Yes, sir, that's correct. We
Okay.
will not have a finance committee meeting in July.
Okay.
Deputy
Jones?
Well, I did see your email. One thing that was a way ahead is, and I had emailed you this, sir, you'd asked about, Mr. Van Tassel had requested further development of internal audit procedures and then recommendations, whether they were binding. Leadership made the decision to have that as part of a study session we're developing with Debbie Davis on that too. So along the lines of his request to have that put on there, we feel that's probably conducive to that process as well. The other items, absolutely. I'll put it on there, but we'll develop a little further with the leadership, the process that we take on that. So all the items will be on there in a draft status for the August meeting, and then we'll take the process of that. But I just want to make sure that as a follow-up to you as well, because you had requested that, or UAPCS or whatever had requested that too. So it's all coming together. It's all, a lot of shared interest and information on that. So we are headed for that particular item on the internal audit findings and recommendations and all that too. So.
Spencer?
Did you say you had 2 items or
Yeah,
just
I have
one?
one more.
Okay. I know this is probably something that belongs in another committee, but I'd like to bring it up. We have a lot of attention and pressure that goes on our teachers. And they're graded and they're reviewed and they are given evaluations, and I know this varies from district to district on what that evaluation is. I continually get asked by constituents, the district blames all this evaluation and grading on us. And I'd love to know what our requirements in grading and evaluation of a teacher, number one. And number two, I keep getting a runaround on this. Almost feels like there are people protecting this next class of people that I'm going to talk about. That is, I believe that principals and superintendents need to have a grade as well, and they should be evaluated, and there should be a system put in place, and if districts are not gutsy enough to do it, and the state school board's not gutsy enough to do it, then I am going to go create ratemyprincipal.com, and I'm going to let people go on and rate their principal, because I am sick and tired of bad principals, because we've learned through the last 3 or 4 years that principals really determine the success of a school. And if you're taking a crappy person from the district office and sticking them out as a principal someplace, it's devastating for a school. And I want to get to the bottom of this. I don't know who to talk to. I'm a lowly state school board member, but every time I bring it up to people here, I'm not going to name names, I get this defense, oh, there is a rating system. The districts do that, and I don't see it. I don't know what it is. So there you go, I just venting.
I'd like to add to that. So this isn't every district. Spencer has a different policy for how to grade their teachers, and so this is kind of problematic as well. We don't have any policy we do have a policy for charter school teachers, but it's not required, but it is required for neighborhood schools. So there is some discrepancy. In my district, there isn't a way to rate your principal. There's a stakeholder input form that I can fill out, and I don't know. I mean, it also goes further than that. How do you do the principal and the superintendent and not all the other support staff? So if we're not working together for a common goal and we don't get the opportunity to reflect on our practice or reflect on other people's practice, then we're just spinning our wheels. So I'd like to agree with you and say that I think we all need to be accountable whether we're succeeding or failing.
Spencer, to some extent, isn't when a school gets a grade, that's the principal's grade? Or when a district gets a grade, that's the superintendent's grade?
We've been chasing our tail on school grading for I don't know how long. And it's changed, it's a moving target, but teachers have no way of evaluating or giving feedback. Parents don't have any way of giving evaluated feedback, so.
Okay.
But your school grade is reflecting on how many people take your SAGE test, and if you're having a disproportionate amount of kids that are not succeeding taking your SAGE test and a higher percentage of your kids who are higher income, then your grade can be determined by the opt-out instead of the actual performance. So your grade is not reflective of actually the schools.
The last topic I'd like to bring up, I sent an email out to the entire board yesterday, which I know you all read in great depth. But in Alpine School District, they just passed a new RDA for Facebook. It's a big deal out there. I want to brag for a moment. That was going to go to West Jordan a couple years ago and end up in Eagle Mountain, but it appears to be about $100 million better, the terms and conditions, than the one going to West Jordan. And I think to some extent it's because the state school board killed it and decided we're going to play hardball. If you want to come to Utah, we're willing to give you half the farm. We're not going to give you the entire farm. New Mexico gave the entire farm, and I think that's good. I think what would really help our school districts, and I think this seems reasonable given all the reporting they have to do on grants or other small things, is if you do an RDA in excess of, let's say, $10 million, you have to do an annual reporting that's on your annual audited financial statements where you say, here is what we gave, here is what it's returned. So that going forward, when school board members are making these, $300 million decisions that will affect people for 20, 30 years, they can pull up the data and say, okay, this is how it's worked so far in our district. This is the amount of return. Because our poor school districts, it's the city councils and the counties and the governor's office of economic development that do all these things. And then it's our school districts that pay for it. Somewhere between 60 and 70% of the funding comes from our poor little local school board members, and none of them right now are out there campaigning on RDAs and economic development. They have no idea. Mark actually served as a local school board member, but I don't think they know. Is that something we could put on our August agenda? I know this is an additional reporting requirement, so maybe we're robbing them of local control, but I don't think they know. I mean, in Alpine School District, they were given literally the information the day before, told you had to decide, they couldn't disclose the name of the entity, and that it would be catastrophic if they didn't approve it. They had no idea, the historical record. This is crazy. I mean, we give them a $5,000 grant, and they have to do all these reporting requirements. They're doing $300 million tax breaks for 30 years, and they have no idea, the track record or history on it.
For people who are going to turn the lights on.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems crazy that there isn't some degree of accountability if they're going to do that. Scott?
Chair, what would you title the agenda item, and what's your intent? What do you want? First of all, if you could give the staff the title of the item, is it an action item or is it informational? And what do you want to accomplish?
I believe we control, to some extent, what is required in the annual financials from our LEAs.
Okay.
Or the standards. So we say you need to add going forward, and we will, I would like to grandfather, I guess that could be a point of debate, but any RDA over 10 million. So we're not going to impose this on little districts or little projects. But if it's more than 10 million, as measured by you guys, then they have to add it to their annual financials. This is what we promised them. This is how they have delivered so far.
As a line item.
Okay.
So we'd probably have to create a new report.
Yeah.
We can't modify financial statements, but we could create something as part of the program reports or financial reports.
And I know that Joel, you're just trying to kill it. I think this is going to be pretty bipartisan, all agreement. What we're doing is we're trying to empower the districts so when they meet the next Facebook or whoever comes and asks for one of these deals, they can say, look, this is how good they've been for us in the past. We don't need to give you 200 million. Maybe we give you 57 million. Because when you say 200 million, that's not how these things have turned out in the past.
And I'm just trying to get the water to the end of the road. So we're going to end up with this, and it's going to be, you're going to see numbers. And you're going to have numbers. The emotional side that you're passionate about, I don't think it's going to trigger to say, oh, do we want to keep doing that? Oh, do we want to really, do we really want to surrender? Or on their report, it's going to say, look what we already gave up. That's what I'm just getting the water. There's people that are in your chair, and then there's people in there that are pro-economic development that want to make things happen, and all of the stakeholders in there make their best educated decision, how bad they want that increased tax base that was better than nothing. There's always this big story, and that line item isn't going to tell that story. And so I think we can come back and talk about it a little more, but and also when I was on the state board, or when I was on my local board, I was also on the county board for economic development, so I wore that other hat to stay informed on all those things. But I think it's important to really say what is the objective, and with what we're asking them to do, and then how will it help with decision making for the board that made the decision, the new board, this board, the future state board. With that information, how we'll bring a betterment.
The goal is to empower school boards to know how well they're working and be able to negotiate better in the future. Spencer.
So I think the true number is how much economic incentive is given for each job over the lifetime of the economic incentive. And if you go look at the number on this deal, it'd make your hair curl. You know, you've already got a little bit of curly hair, you don't have any, so you can't. Scott, you and I are in the same boat. But the fact of the matter is, how much money, I love economic development. I want us to do, but we happen to live in a state where we have everything going for us. Everybody wants to come here, okay? And if we can continue a well-educated workforce, they want to come here. For me, I would put a moratorium on 5 counties could not give any economic development. That forced economic, only places that incentives could be given would be in our rural parts of our county or our state. And because we got people dying to get here, so dying to get here, they came back after they said, we will never come back to this state ever again because you treated us so wrongly. And guess what? Now we have a big blue F out in Eagle Mountain. That's number 1 rant. Number 2 rant. This is how badly this place doesn't want this. I went to ratemyprincipal.com and it's blocked.
Motion to adjourn?
What if you changed it to rate my?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, thank you.
Let's rate my principal. I'm saying that the administration here has blocked my access to this page. I can't even go to rate my principal.
Here's our IT director. I got paid to do it.
Yeah.
So this is more. I don't know if you're going to be interested in it. I did all the districts and all the levies.
Okay, so you put it so you can.
Yeah, sort of.
Yeah.
So this is my board levy. So these are the most highest board levies and the lowest board levies. And then we get it.
We need to make sure that.
So
often.
well, I think why it might be because before they put in the bill this year, I think that we had to get out of 0.002. Maybe.
Really?
Possibly. And then voted levies, who are the voted levies? The highest and the lowest voted levies. So there's 4 districts that don't have a vote. Now Morgan